You have two courses out and they are both pretty successful, I would say. How did you make them successful? Because you probably didn't just put them on Udemy and then hope that something would happen. Maybe you can tell us a bit how you got people to actually buy your courses on Udemy.
I would have a few pieces of advice that I would give myself when I initially started this.
In this episode of the Coding in Flow podcast, I will be talking to Catalin Ghita, who is an Android developer that also sells courses on Udemy. At the moment, he has over 22,000 students on Udemy, spread across two courses with an average rating of 4.6 stars, so I would say he's pretty successful. And I noticed Catalin because he posts a lot of useful stuff on Twitter, so I contacted him and asked him for an interview because I thought a lot of people in my audience, a lot of you guys might also be interested in selling your own courses on Udemy and making some money this way. So in this episode, we will cover a lot of questions about this you might have, like how you can get started creating courses on Udemy, what type of income you can expect, if you can live from that, how to market your courses so people actually buy them, and a lot of questions like this. And we will also talk about some Android-related topics like Jetpack Compose, cross-platform development, architecture, MVVM versus MVI. So I think it's a really interesting episode. So just lean back and enjoy the show. And before we start, I want to thank the sponsor of this episode, which is the Stream Chat SDK. If you have ever tried to build a real-time chat app from scratch, you know how difficult it is. Features like live messages with pagination, offline support, or group chats are really hard to get right. Now when you use the Stream SDK to build your chat, all of this just works right out of the box. It's extremely easy to get started with, but at the same time it's very customizable. It's built with modern app architecture in mind, and you can use it with XML or Jetpack Compose, Kotlin or Java, or pretty much any other language and platform. I was blown away by how easy it is to use, how well it works, and how good the documentation is. And the best thing, it's completely free if you're making less than $10,000 in monthly revenue and have less than 5 team members. So if you're planning to implement a chat into your app, do yourself a favor and give Stream a try. You can find out more by clicking the link in the description or visit getstream.io/codinginflow. Okay, so at the beginning of the episode, I like to ask my guest about their personal life. So maybe you can tell us a bit what you do in your free time, what your hobbies are, as much as you want to share. And also, how did you get into programming? Maybe when did you start programming and what do you like about it?
Yeah. So well, I can actually start with what I do in my free time. I kind of spend a lot of time reading. I love reading, and more precisely, I also love writing. So it doesn't really have to be technical or not, even though I kind of spend most of my time doing technical writing. This is a great passion of mine, and I really see like a future where I only rely on writing because I just like it so much. Now going back to me, I'm working right now as an Android developer for the past 4 years, I think. At the current company, I've been working for almost 3 years. The thing is that I started Android or I started programming because I was really bummed out with the way that our school system works. This started out in high school, even though we had teachers that were explaining to us how programming works and what the basics are. It wasn't really taught in a good manner. So maybe I'm subjective here. Maybe this is happening locally, even though I've heard many stories that many people were kind of let down with the way that they were taught, so they started learning on themselves. And by all means, I'm a self-taught programmer. I didn't really take any kind of physical courses on programming apart from what I learned at school. But that was like a very small fraction, right? So what happened is that when I got into college, right, when I attended the university, that kind of feeling of disappointment rose even higher. Because I was having huge expectations, right? If on one hand at high school maybe you have a sort of level of expectations, when you go to the university you have this kind of idea that you will learn advanced topics and that everything will be really well structured, really well taught. And again, it wasn't like that, and I felt really disappointed, even with like different topics about programming. It was not what I was expecting. It was pretty bad, and all the kind of languages, programming languages, the tools, the APIs that we were working on, they were really old, and it was not really that fun to learn. It was not that really fun to actually participate, right? So what I did is I just started learning on my own, and my idea was that how can I get to build something fast, and how can I see my product, how can I see it really fast. I wanted to see something that was built with my hands, right? So that kind of creation or building instinct that we all have. So I had an Android phone, right? And I thought to myself that the easiest way for me to do something and see the result really quickly was an Android app. So I started learning Android, and that was obviously apart from what I was being taught at the university. And the thing is that it opened a lot of opportunities to me. It was great that I had to learn everything by myself, and I obviously started with Java at that time. Kotlin was still not the new kid around the block or the popular choice like it is right now. And I started learning Java and getting into the core and the basics of Java. And I was lucky because I had a bit of experience. I've worked with C, C++, and all other languages at my university. So I had some kind of basic knowledge. But it was obviously something else when you kind of try to learn on your own and on your own terms, and just dedicate a lot of time doing that. And it was fun. It was much more fun than I expected it to be. And by the time that I got to actually learn Android, well, things got even cooler, right? Because I was able to see apps built really fast by me. And even though I didn't really know about any kind of design patterns or MVVM presentation patterns or anything like that, it was cool because I was able to see my result really fast. And I published a couple of apps on the Play Store, which right now are kind of really old and unmaintained, unfortunately. But it was fun at that time. So I kind of thought to myself that this is what I want to do, right? So I started learning even more, and I tried to somehow not only learn how to build apps, right? I tried to learn how to correctly build apps, how to be proficient at it. So I started studying design patterns, the solid principles. I started buying books from Robert C. Martin about clean architecture, about the agile methodology, right? So I tried to go into a bit of depth. And as I was getting to my first job and my second job, my idea was that I've always enjoyed writing. I've always enjoyed doing these kind of extra things. So I started actually building a small blog, and I started publishing on Medium and other platforms, small pieces of articles, right? And I actually enjoyed it, even though they weren't the big success that everybody expects them to be. It was fun doing so, and I felt that since I was self-taught and basically the online community was the only help that I had, I was somehow feeling that I was giving back some of that, and that's how it all started for me. So I can say that in my spare time, to kind of wrap this all up, I spend a lot of time writing about Android, talking about Android. It's kind of my life now, even though I obviously love doing people stuff like taking a hike or riding the bicycle. I like going on long routes and having a lot of outdoor activities. But yeah, this is how I would kind of sum it up.
Okay, so did I understand this correctly? You studied computer science and you finished it, but you learned most of the real stuff by yourself.
Yeah. So my university was more towards. The big part of it was more towards electronics, right, and having this kind of more hardware oriented part, and I didn't really like it, so I went on the kind of software orientation, so computer science, and this is exactly where I got disappointed, because I was expecting things to change, and I was expecting things to get better and to actually learn valuable things. And well, it wasn't like that. I even had a teacher that basically was confused about concepts, really simple objected programming concepts, and that was a downer to me. I just went to him and I kind of Googled something to him, and I said, "You're not teaching this right. I mean, it's not okay." So he was basically just saying something like. Certain types of overriding, right, and overloading concepts and polymorphism, he was mixing them, and that was something that really made me think, and I was disappointed. So exactly as you said, I would say that 99% of what I know right now is because I kind of spent the time of learning it on my own.
So in hindsight, if you could turn back the time, would you study computer science again, or would you approach it differently? Would you go self-taught all the way and not study at all?
Yeah, that's a great question, because unfortunately we still have companies that kind of care about your degree, and I kind of seen that. My friend is actually looking for an Android position, and he's more like an intern level, right? And he doesn't have she doesn't have, obviously, a computer science degree. She has a different kind of degree, and because of that she had interviews where she was refused, simply because that, hey, you don't have a computer science degree. It's fine, it's cool what you do right there, but we don't need that. We want somebody with some sort of computer science background. And I think that this is stupid, and I think that that's it doesn't make any sense in the times that we are living right now. We have a huge chunk of developers that are self-taught, and I think that if you would kind of ignore all of that only because they don't have a computer science background or degree, it makes no sense. It feels that they are ignored for no reason. And answering to your question, if you would ask me, I would probably just go on the route of learning everything on my own and not even attending the university, because it was useless. Yet, if I can add something, and this is something that I would really see right now, the university would make a lot of sense. And I've seen this kind of approach in some employers, and it made me think. So they were not really interested in you having a computer science degree or not. They just wanted you to have a computer or a simple degree, right? It didn't matter the type. And they had this kind of concept, this kind of idea that university, right, or college is more like a proof of your resilience, because you've spent 4 years, 3, 4 years, maybe even 6 for some universities, right? And you kind of gone there daily, and you've put the effort, and you were really resilient, and you were able to finish it. And they see that as a proof that you are not going to bail on them on the first problem, that you're a person that goes through the bad weather, right, and doesn't jump the boat immediately. And I think that this kind of makes sense, but it doesn't make sense, obviously, to only restrict people to computer science degree. And we all know, and I've seen a lot of people that made me feel small as I was holding interviews that didn't have a computer science degree, and they were really great. As Elon Musk previously said, that he doesn't care if you have a degree or not. It's just that how good you are at what you do, right?
Yeah, I did not study computer science, but if I could turn back the time, I think I actually would study, even though, as you say, it's not so important for the practical part. But I would, as you said, I would use that time. I would try to use that time intelligently, meaning I would probably not attend classes if I don't have to. I would learn by myself. I think this is also what Philip Luckner did, who was here on the podcast in the first episode. He basically learned the stuff by himself. And because he did this, he was able to use his time much better. He built his Instagram and YouTube channel while he was studying in university. And he was doing all this other stuff, and he still got his degree. So I think it's good to still study computer science at this day and age if you want to get a job, but don't use it as an excuse. So for the listeners who are wondering if they should study or not, they should not use this as an excuse to not do anything else, because university can be an excuse. I know that when I was in university, when I studied business economics, then I would go to classes and I would feel good about going there because I was supposed to attend them, and this is what I did. But if I would be really honest to myself, there was no point in me being there. I couldn't really focus while I was sitting there. These classes were long, but after like 50 minutes, your thoughts drift off and you don't even learn anything anymore. So it's really a good way to trick yourself, basically, to think you are productive, but you are really wasting your time. So what I mean is, go ahead, study computer science, but try to use your time efficiently. Try to learn as much practical stuff as you can in your spare time, basically, because I often hear that computer science, they don't really teach the really practical stuff, like how to actually write code. So you have to do this by yourself and try to network with other people. This is probably also what university is good for, to network with other programmers that have the same interests. And maybe also try to write some blog posts or create some social media content to build your brand. So just use your time intelligently. This is what I think makes the most sense. But of course, you have to be disciplined for that. And also, I wasn't disciplined in my early 20s. So I would not have done what I just said myself, looking back. I was pretty lazy. But with my insights from today, this is what I want to do. But also, people should not feel bad if they just want to take it a bit more easy. I don't want anyone to feel like they have to hustle all the time. And you mentioned your blog, and I will also put a link to your blog into the show notes later so people can take a look at this. I've already read through some articles, they were really interesting. And the main topic of this episode today will be your courses on Udemy, because you're successful with your courses on Udemy. But before we go there, let's quickly talk about your job, because you're also a normal Android employee, right, at a company. And yeah, maybe you want to tell us what your job role is there and basically what you do all day at your job, what kind of code you're writing and how your day is structured.
Yeah. So as you know, I'm just a normal Android developer. I'm the actual lead Android developer at my company, and I've had a chance to interview a lot of people. So sometimes I hold a lot of interviews, and I was able to see a lot of people, a lot of developers that had different kind of mindsets, and it really helped me understand what's really important for a developer to be successful. Now, in terms of what I do, I'm working with my colleagues on huge applications at my current job. We have apps with millions of users and hundreds of thousands of daily active users. And the thing is that when you work on such huge apps, you have to be really, really careful on how you actually deploy and how you have your entire release pipeline, if you will. So we have apps that receive updates every week, and there is a lot of work. We have this kind of startup oriented strategy where we release really often, and we have a lot of changes that happen every week. And that I would say that the most difficult task that we had is to come up with an architecture that would allow us to develop features really easily and to have this kind of really easy transition with new developers. Because our team grew exponentially. We had a lot of new developers that were coming in. Obviously, there were points where the team would shrink. For example, with the COVID situation, initially it kind of blasted everything and everybody was panicking. But I would say that generally our team grew, and we always had to onboard new developers on existing projects, on huge projects with hundreds of screens, hundreds of fragments, and dozens of activities. And the architecture should be really simple, and it should allow other developers to start working on features with much ease, right? You don't want them to spend a lot of time understanding the inner workings of your project, of your architecture. You want them to start doing and start shipping features, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important in such environments. Obviously, there are environments where optimizations count and having perfect apps count, but at least in the one that I'm working on, it's really important to ship fast and to have a lot of features done really quickly and with as few bugs as possible, obviously. So what we did, we kind of came up with this architecture where we have a basic MVVM, right? So maybe a view where that is an activity or a fragment, and the presentation layer would be a view model, and everything from that on would be the model layer, the repository, maybe some use cases for the business logic. But the main thing is that we kind of borrowed some concepts from MVI and even from Redux, and they were simple concepts that we could apply. The idea that the view model should kind of hold the state for our views, right? And should be the only source of truth for that state. And when that state is received on the view end, so on the activity or the fragment, that view should bind that state, and that state should be the kind of single source of truth for it, right? So whatever state it receives, that's what it's going to render, right? So this is really similar somehow to how Jetpack Compose works right now. We kind of tried to do this with like fragments and activities, and it worked really well. Because you'd have this kind of unique entry point where you would bind your UI on your views, right? You would have a bind view state, let's say method, and you would receive a state, and your job would be just to bind that state and make sure that the UI, the view, the XML layout just is really appropriate with that state, that it received that information. And that was really helpful because we've had developers coming in and saying that, hey, thank you for having such a straightforward architecture. It was easy for them to have this kind of guideline, right? Where you would build new screens really easy, new features, new flows, because everything was a bit more constrained in the idea that the activity was referenced obviously through an abstract component that would have generics and that would force it to have a certain type of view model, right? And at the same time, the view model would be constrained with to have some sort of repository or use case, and everything would kind of go from the previous component to the next one. You would be forced to create components and to have this kind of really interesting way of building UI. So you would build a view and then you would have to build the view model, otherwise it wouldn't work, right? So we didn't want to basically enroll people or developers that would come and would just come up with their own presentation design pattern, right? With their own idea of architecture. Even though we obviously changed that architecture with their input, it's not nice to have a huge project with hundreds of screens with different presentation patterns, right? It's not consistent. It's not the way it should be. So we came up with this idea that we have a UI state, and even with screens that had a lot of UI interaction, right? So a lot of user-generated events, we would borrow this idea that the view should send some event to the view model, and the view model will be that kind of a store where it would receive the events and just mutate that existing state into a new one, obviously corresponding to the event that was generated. And this is an interesting talk because there are developers that say that MVVM is like the holy grail, right? It's the best solution. This one should be used. There are other developers that say that maybe MVI is better. And I always say that it's obviously depending on the context. Probably, most of the time, a simple MVVM is going to suffice, right? But there are cases where you have a lot of interactions on specific screens where MVI makes sense. So it's not that, everything is contextual, right? You don't want to say that A is better or the best, or B is better or the best. It obviously depends on the project, the requirements and how the kind of the UI is built around that, right? So we would have screens where we would have a lot of UI events, and we would create a sort of unidirectional flow of events and data, right? Just to make sure that we don't have multiple entry points that would either mutate the state or would obviously allow the view model to change that state from different other methods, from different other entry points. And this would go the other way around with the concept of state. So the view would receive the state and it wouldn't have multiple entry points where it would bind that state, right? It would have a central entry point. And this is really similar to Compose, and we will explain this a bit better when we get there. But yeah.
So you implemented this before Compose came out?
Yeah, so what we kind of try to do is have this sort of unidirectional idea, flow of data and events oriented towards fragments and activities, and it worked out really well. It was obviously not the perfect match, as nothing is, obviously, but it worked well because it had this kind of idea of state and UI that binds that state.
So I read your blog post about this earlier. You also took the same approach over to Jetpack Compose later, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically MVVM with concepts from MVI implemented, or is it just completely MVI?
No, it's again, I wouldn't really say that you can. I don't think that maybe MVI, like a bare bone MVI, makes sense in the context of Android. I would say that all the architectures that I've worked on started off from MVVM, and where I felt that I could improve something was just by borrowing some concept, exactly as you said, from MVI, because there were ideas that helped us centralize and have unique entry points into our screens, and it made sense for those screens that had 10 or 15 events or very complex states that have to be managed. So there were a lot of side effects that would happen, and we kind of tried to go around the idea of having illegal states, mostly due to the imperative paradigm that the view system has, right? And Compose is a bit better. It works on the declarative paradigm, so it's a much better fit, right, to this. But again, it's all about context. It might not make sense for some projects.
So I don't really have any experience with MVI, only that I've read a little bit about it. But the thing is, for example, in my hobby project, which I have on the Play Store, I take a lot of input from Gabo Varadia, who is a really smart, you know him from Twitter, right? He's a really smart developer, and I trust him with a lot of stuff. And when I built my app and try to improve it and try to improve the code, when I come up with a concept from MVI and I'm considering implementing it, he usually has some alternative for it that often seems simpler. When I, for example, again, I don't really know how MVI works, but what I see is that there is this method on the view model where you pass in an event, which is a sealed class, right?
Yeah.
And what I don't really get is what's the difference of that between just calling methods on the view model that you put directly as public methods in the view model. What's the benefit over this method that takes in a sealed class?
Yeah, so I think that this is a great question, and I've kind of tried to approach this in the past. And what you're basically saying is that why should I have this kind of central flow of events that comes into my view model, right? And why can't I just have some methods that are called by the view? So the view just calls the methods on the view model, and that's it. And I would say that 99% or maybe 95% of the cases, it's enough for you to have a few methods, right? That mutate the state of the UI in the view model, right? So it would make sense what you're saying. Now, what we faced in some of the screens that were really complex, we were ending up with so much presentation logic in the view model. And I'm just saying that it would have maybe hundreds of lines of presentation logic. And the idea was that the view would have so many entry points to mutate the state, right? So it would have 10, 15 methods depending on the events that it would trigger into the view model. And the view model would have so many methods on which the kind of it would allow it to mutate the state, and that just becomes unmanageable after some point. It works for simple screens, it all works for maybe medium complexity screens, but for screens that have a lot of interactions, it just makes more sense to have maybe a sort of universal catcher of events, because it's really easy to scale. Why is that? Because you just add a new type of event, and then you go into your view model in the actual method that knows how to catch those events, how to maybe intercept those events, right? And you just add a new case, right? Just as you said, like a sealed class. But the main concept here was that you would have a unique entry point that would cause the UI to mutate. And it would be easier to, at some point, just add 2 or 3 more events, right? You would just maybe trigger those events from the UI, and then you would go to the view model and define them. You wouldn't have to go and all the time just call view model dot another method, view model dot another method. It would just be redundant, and you would have so many methods into your view model, and you wouldn't really know which method does something, maybe mutates the state, or maybe another method creates a side effect which is different, and everything would be really bundled together. So again, it makes sense for those screens that have high complexity or a lot of presentation logic.
Yeah, I will try to play around with this in the future, because I can only really wrap my head around this if I work with this myself. And again, you have a blog post about this, so I will put a link to this post into the show notes as well, where you explain how you build such a view model and how you build such a screen, and also in relation to Jetpack Compose, I think. So people can take a look at this if they want to learn more. And of course, you have courses on Udemy. And you have over 22,000 students right now, and also very good reviews, and over 500 reviews already. And yeah, why did you start creating courses on Udemy? I mean, I know why I would start to make money, but maybe you also have some other reasons why you started creating courses on Udemy, because many people have this idea in mind, but they don't end up doing it. So yeah, what was maybe you can also tell us when you started with that, and what was your trigger to do that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, a really tough one, I would say, because I obviously didn't go with that mindset of I want to make a course just to earn money. It's like obviously not the best practice on which you'd start everything, but it makes sense that everything that you do should have a reward, right? And that reward is usually right in money, because that's what sustains you. So at the end of the day, whether you create a project like a blog, right, or a course or anything else, at the end of the day, if that thing makes you money, then it means that you did a good job. If it doesn't make you money, well, it could obviously mean that you did a good job, but you also need that kind of reward, right? Because it's something that makes sense regarding your effort. So the idea is that I initially started with doing some blog posts. I was having this kind of idea that I wanted to give back to the community what it initially gave me, because again, everything I learned was from people online and reading stuff and taking courses online, and I just wanted to be like that person that also tries to give back. I didn't really go for the money in the initial phase. And again, I would advise you to maybe go on the route of being passionate about it. And soon afterwards, the money will follow, because it's natural. They are linked together, and that's the way it should be. So my initial trigger was obviously I wanted to give back. And I started creating a course. I was actually aiming to create a small course, because I didn't have experience. I didn't know how to do video editing. I didn't know how to structure a course. It was everything really new to me, but I wanted to give it a try. And this is something that I advise. I kind of give this advice to everyone. And I want, after I go with my motivation, to give you a bit of steps or some kind of advice that I would really give myself a few years back when I would start. And what I did is just start by being passionate. I tried to make a small course which was free, and as I was adding content to it, I realized that I was kind of adding so much work to it. I was spending so much time and trying to edit, trying to learn to structure and to explain a concept. It was really difficult because when you write a blog, that's obviously really difficult as well. But when you try to actually explain that in a video, it's obviously that you have to come up with a voice and have the correct way of explaining things, right? And you want to take the reader through all the concepts so that it makes sense to them, just like it did for you. And what I did is just after I spent so much time doing it, I said, okay, I'm going to make this like a paid course because I've spent so many hours, so many days working on it. And if I get anything good, that's good. If I don't get anything, then that's good as well. So this was my initial drive, yeah.
Yeah, it's also an option to just make free courses on Udemy. I actually know someone who made like 2 or 3 free courses, and it's also a nice way to build your reach because Udemy apparently really promotes them. So this is also an option. But yeah, as you said, it's good to have a goal in mind when you do something like that. And Udemy is an option to make passive income. And yeah, you already touched on the point that making videos is quite difficult. What stresses me out about videos a bit is that you can't go back into a video and repair a mistake you did there, like you can do in a blog post. In a blog post, you can just edit it, but in a video, you have to make the whole video again, which can be really annoying. So we can also talk a bit about tips on how to create a good course, but actually I've noted it down for later. Let's first go somewhere else. Yeah, what people are also interested in, of course, how much money they can make there. So you don't have to tell us how much money you make exactly, but would it already be enough to live from that? And would you consider in the future, I mean, maybe you can't say this here on camera, but would you consider quitting your job if you make enough money from Udemy to live from it?
Yeah, so again, thanks for the question. It's something that I've asked myself many times, and I don't know if I have the best answer for it. But essentially, I mean, this is obviously depending on the context, depending where you live and how much the cost of living is for you there. But I would say that in the first months, so when I had the courses initially, they weren't producing substantial amounts of money. They were more like a passive income, if you can call it that. It was just something that would be like a bonus, right? Obviously, as time went by and they kind of been more mature and they've earned more students, the courses started making some money, and I can safely say that right now I could live off them.
Nice.
Depending on my context, that I live in Romania and the cost of living is not that big. Probably if I would be in New York, I would say no because the cost of living there is much higher. But it's not a golden rule. It's not like I can say tomorrow, yeah, I'm going to quit my job and I'm just going to do courses for the rest of my life, because there are good months and there are bad months. It's not like you have your payday where you know that you will receive a certain amount of money and that you can do some kind of plans with it and maybe, I don't know, stash some money, invest some money, because you have that fixed figure. With courses and basically with every other kind of content creation product, you'll have different or variable income, right? So maybe there are months where I couldn't really say that I can live off of it. And I couldn't really say that I could really be dependent or independent, right? And you couldn't really live off of it every month. But most of the time, it would provide you a good income that would support you. Now, the thing is, even if I would be like really successful, right, and I would have millions of students, I don't know if I would quit my job completely. I think that having something that drives you is really important. So you don't want to lose this kind of aspect of being involved in something. It's great to have things on the side. And I think that this is something that I encourage everyone to do. And we will speak this about this as the next point about the advices. But I also encourage people to be not really have a traditional job, but to be involved in projects that keeps them sane, right? You don't want to earn so much money that you don't know what to do afterwards. It's not the point of it. I've met developers that earn so much money that they quit their job completely, right? And they didn't find a meaning in their life. So that's something that I wouldn't go really on that route.
Yeah, I think I would not have a problem finding a meaning in my life, but there's still a danger in just teaching full time. And that is what happened to me when I started my YouTube channel. I focused so much on tutorials that I did not actually build stuff on the side. And I also did not work as an actual developer. And then the problem was I didn't gain real life experience. And this was really I really noticed that when I was planning to create my first paid courses, because I then realized, okay, on YouTube, I can make a really small isolated tutorial on a little topic that works. And people will like it because it's free anyway. But when you make a course when you make a paid course, unless it's very focused on a small topic, you usually also need to provide some real app, or you need to show how to apply these concepts to a real app. And with a real app, I mean an app that just has some features like database access and calling remote API and then maybe caching. This is something that is not very extremely simple. And somewhere around 2019, I noticed that I'm not actually able to build such an app. And this is why I didn't make any paid courses. Then I started learning this. And this is really something that can happen if you don't actually work as an Android or as a developer on the side. If you only focus on creating tutorials, then you lack the real life experience. This is why I think even if you can live from courses and Udemy, you have to work on some real projects, because otherwise how do you keep your knowledge fresh, and how do you make sure that you actually know what you're talking about? You need to work at least on some personal projects or maybe on open source projects, but you can't just teach. And the one thing that's a bit annoying about making programming courses is that they are outdated relatively fast. I mean, you can still sell them after a year and they will still be good, but making a course is difficult. And because they are eventually outdated, you don't really have this option to create a lot of courses, and you can't really build this library of courses that just keep selling year and year after year again.
Yeah.
Which is possible in some other niches. When you talk about marketing, okay, marketing has also changes. There's social media, and before social media, there were television and so on. But there are maybe certain topics where the courses are more evergreen. They are not outdated so fast.
Yeah.
This is why it's difficult to actually make a living from programming courses, in my opinion. Even though there are people who are really good at this, they make, I don't know, 6 figures, 7 figures from courses. But on Android, at least, I have not been able to come up with a way to achieve that. Even just creating the one paid course I have was already like 2 months of full-time work. And now a few months later, it's not fresh anymore. Parts of it are have already changed. And this is really the problem with this. But this is something you can't really change. You just have to get more efficient at making courses, basically. Yeah. But you have 2 courses out and they are both pretty successful, I would say. So how did you make them successful? Because you probably didn't just put them on Udemy and then hope that something would happen. You did some marketing, right? Maybe you can tell us a bit how you got people to actually buy your courses on Udemy.
Yeah. So we're back to that part where I would have a few pieces of advice that I would give myself when I initially started this. And I think that the most important one that the people that are hearing us right now should listen to is that they should just start doing it. It doesn't matter whether you are good or bad at what you do. If it's a blog, if it's maybe an article or a course or anything like that, you should just take the initiative and start. Just do it like that. really famous commercial says, that brand of sneakers says,
Just do it. Yeah.
Exactly. Because, and I have a small story here. I have a very good friend of mine that recently found out that I'm working on writing a book, and he was really happy for me. But he said at the same time that he always wanted to do that, but he never really found the time. He always said that he doesn't really, apart from his job, he doesn't find that specific time to do extra things like a book or a course or anything like that. And I just gave him my example, right? I've had this year probably the worst year of my life because I've had very serious health issues. I've had a very bad and a very severe heart disease, and I'm still recovering from that. I have multiple other problems on the health plan. So basically, in terms of my personal health, I'm not in the best spot. And I told him that I don't want you to feel bad for me. I'm not saying this because of that. I'm saying that if I can do it and if I can find time to maybe create a course or update a course or write an article, if I can find time in my situation, what's your excuse, right? I mean, why don't you do that? Because you would probably be much better than I am, because you would have a much better health, you'd have a much better initiative than I would have, because I'm not feeling that well right now. And I think that this is something that everybody should hear out, and they should stop doing or making up excuses for themselves. They should find that time and do something that they love, that they like, because that thing is going to really empower them. And that's really important. It's not always to be like, I have a job and this is where my life ends. It's obviously really important to have a personal life. It's essential. But you shouldn't come up with things that I can't find the time to do that. I'll never have the time. Yes, you do. You do have that time. You just have to find it. You just have to be organized. Just have to take the initiative and be motivated to do it. And this is what I told him. Hey, this is my situation. I'm not in the best place right now, and I'm still doing it. Why aren't you doing it? Why are you telling me that you don't have time? I'm sure that if you can try to think of it, you'll find a bit of time to do what you want, right? To write that book. So this is the first advice that I would give to myself a few years ago, because I was doing the same things. I was just procrastinating, and I was saying, I don't have time for that. But I was playing on the computer, for example, right? Or maybe an hour or two with my friends. And I was saying that I don't have time. I'm busy with my job. I'm busy with school, university. But I wasn't really thinking that I should make time for it, because it's important, right? This is the first step towards creating some content. It doesn't matter the type of content, right? So this is what I would give as the first thing. Just do it. Just start. And something that's really bugging me out, and I've heard a lot of my friends saying that they want to start doing something, but they're saying that I'm not an expert at that. How can I teach that through a blog post? Or how can I create a course, right? The course is huge. How can I create a course? Because I don't master this really well. And I always tell them that the best way to learn something is by teaching it. And I think that we've all heard about this, but believe me, you just have to try it, and it will do magic. It will do wonders for you. It's just such a great technique for you to learn something and then to give back and just teach somebody else about it. It makes you start putting the right or questioning the right things. How does this concept work? Why is this concept here? Why? Because you are trying to explain to somebody else, and you might even realize that you don't know that concept. So even though you're not maybe the best Android developer, or maybe you're not the best, web developer, whatever, it doesn't mean that you can't start teaching something. Just set your mind to it and you will do it. I started teaching Jetpack Compose after I've just written a couple of articles about it. I didn't know Jetpack Compose. I wasn't part of the team that developed it, right? I didn't know too much about it. Yet I started learning about it, and I tried teaching people as I was learning, and it was a really nice journey, right, for you, because you start understanding concepts much clearer. You start asking the correct questions, because you're not only asking yourself, you're asking them for your readers, for your viewers, right? And that just makes you think about things that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have thought. So this is my second thing. You don't have to be an expert. Don't make that as an excuse. You can teach things without being really good at it. You just need to have that kind of motivation to learn it. And then I would also have my other side of friends, right, that would say that I don't have money for expensive equipment. I don't have money for expensive software, like to do video editing. I don't know how to do it. And I always said that you can always start small. And I've seen that story about a particular girl that was just really keen on teaching people a specific skill set, right? And she didn't have a camera, right? She didn't have money to buy one. So she filmed everything with her phone. And at that time, the phones weren't that good as they are now, right? They were pretty crappy. And she still did it. And she made money of that because of that, right? And I think that this really goes to show that if you want to do something, you don't have to have the most expensive $1,000 microphone, right? Or the $2,000 camera, right? You just have to start with something, and you will be rewarded, and you will be able to buy new stuff as you go along. So don't make that your excuse either. And I think that also something that's really important is to keep grinding. When I first published my course, it just sucked really bad because I didn't have that kind of enrollment rate that I was hoping it would have. I wasn't receiving huge amounts of money as I was expecting to be. Why? Because when somebody tries to do something, right, and tries to kind of spend some time and create a product, they expect that product to be successful out of the box, right, from the first try. And I'm here to tell you that statistically, that won't happen in most cases. If you're lucky, yeah, if you're really good, yeah, it will happen to you. But most of the time, the first tries for your product or course, whatever, they won't be as successful as you're expecting them to be. And the most important thing is here that you should keep grinding. You should keep coming up with ideas and projects and products, because at some point you will actually be successful. And one of those products will be really good. And again, you should really try to not bail or abandon the ship after one project that wasn't really successful. Just try to be consistent and say that, hey, it didn't work out that well for me for the first time. It doesn't mean that the second time it will be the same. And this brings me to something very, very important, something that I've learned, and that is you should really be careful about the subject that you are picking, right? Again, we have covered the idea that you don't have to pick a subject that you're good at, so you don't have to be restricted from that point of view, right? You can pick everything that you set your mind to, because as you are learning, you can teach people. But the question remains, what subjects should I pick? How can I make sure that the subject is good? And I've made this mistake, and I just went with the idea that I know some Android development. I'm pretty good at it. At least that's what I thought I was. So I tried to make an Android course, which turned out to have a lot of students, but it didn't have that kind of consistency, and it didn't have that kind of huge revenue that I was expecting. Why? Because I didn't try to investigate the idea. I didn't try to evaluate the idea before I would put it into practice. So something really important, you're thinking of making a course. So you're hearing us right now and you're saying, yeah, I'm going to do a course about this, or I'm going to write a blog about this. Before you do it, try to make sure that that subject doesn't have a huge competition. You want to search those areas that have low competition. Maybe there are 2 or 3 other courses, but they are not really teaching the subject really well. And you're saying to yourself, yeah, I'm going to go there and I'm going to try to do a better job than those guys, and I'm going to take their bread, right? After all, I'm going to take that kind of user share, that students share that you're looking for. So try to find those subjects that don't have that much competition, and because that's a place where you can be successful, right? And most importantly, it's not enough for them to be with low competition. I mean, something really obscure can have low competition. The question is that subject in demand, right? Do people actually want to learn about that subject? And this is a great thing when I started making my Compose project. Compose wasn't in alpha. I mean, I think it was in a very, very alpha release, and people weren't really talking about it that much. So I said, why don't I make a course about it? Because I didn't see too many other courses on Compose. They were pretty bad. They had like 30 minutes of content or something. And I said, why don't I do that? Because I think that this might be the future of development, right? Because we have Flutter and React Native that have the same declarative paradigm, right? So why can't I bet on this horse, right? And why can't I think of this subject to be successful? Because eventually Android will build UI just like the other platforms are. For example, iOS is doing the same with Swift UI, right? The same declarative paradigm. So it was clear that Android was going into that direction. So I tried to make a course on that. I didn't know too much about Jetpack Compose, and it kind of worked, at least until now. We will see afterwards. As you said, topics kind of lose their interest really fast, and everything gets deprecated. And yeah, that's something that we have to live with, right? It's something that we kind of, it's a risk that we have taken. So apart from picking a good subject and making sure that it doesn't have competition and that it's in demand, I would advise you to try to center your product, be it an article, a series of articles, or a course, to be a hands-on project, right? You want people to give them that experience of actually building something. Because I think that the best way to learn something is by building something. I think that this is widely known and widely accepted by developers, that it's much easier to learn something by building it. So just don't come with a course that has theory, right? And maybe some examples without any kind of context, because no matter how good a subject is, it won't really make the difference that you're looking for. So it's really important for the kind of to have your course built with this kind of idea that it's practical, that you have to go through a journey and experience building multiple or just one huge app. It will help readers to better conceptualize the concepts and see how they can apply those things in the future. I've actually had one of the students tell me that he was really glad that the course had practical examples, because as he's now writing Compose in real life projects, he's coming back to the code that we've written in this course because it helps him have that kind of reference point. It helps him to have that starting point, right? So yeah, this is another piece of advice. And what I would also like to enforce is that you want to keep your videos simple, right? Your course simple. And regarding what you said, Florian, I don't think that a course or a tutorial should go into really advanced topics. It should really cover the starting point of that kind of library or concept or programming language that you want to cover. Why? Because, well, you need to provide the student that kind of a starting point, that kind of launch pad. And from that on, it's his responsibility to kind of scale things and try to understand things even better and try to explore other APIs within that library or whatever. Why? Because you can't really provide a course that covers everything. It's impossible. It's just these kind of areas are so complex. These kind of libraries are so complex that if you would try to cover everything, I don't think that you would even make a favor, or it wouldn't be that good for the student, because he wouldn't really go through that trouble of trying to build on top of what he learned, right? So you need to try to provide a starting point. You need to provide him a good launchpad so he can be independent from that point on. That's very important. Now, you said something about marketing. I think that this is something really important, right? And marketing a course is really difficult, or marketing a blog is really difficult. It's not like you're gonna go on, I don't know, social media and just promote your course and people are gonna instantly jump in and buy your course or join your course by default. That's not gonna happen. And this is where you actually need an online presence, an audience, exactly as you mentioned, Florian. That's a great point. You need to make sure that you build an online presence. You need to make sure that you invest time in that and you build an audience, because that audience will likely buy your course, will likely try to listen to what you have to say. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I've done. I started doing that so late in my journey because I didn't know that I was supposed to. So if you're starting out right now and I don't know, you're a junior Android developer or a mid Android developer, just start building an online presence. You have no idea how much this thing will help you in the future. So this is where I totally agree with you, Florian. And as you start creating your course, as you start adding content to your course. I've seen this in content creators. Some of my friends, they have this kind of tendency, and starting with me, to be perfectionist. They try to edit those videos to be perfect. They don't want them to have one blooper or something. They want to have the perfect noise reduction. They want to have everything as perfect as possible. And I think that while this is a good attitude, it's not the most productive one. Most of the time, what happens with courses on Udemy is that you need to find that niche topic where you go and plug your course into so you can be successful. The most important niche is like, a general Android tutorial, general Android course. They are already taken by the giant teachers that have hundreds of thousands of students, and you have no chance to compete with them. So when you find the niche, and this is really important, you don't want to go into those generic topics. It's important for you to make a difference. So sometimes, as with startups, it's very important to ship fast. So you want to make sure that you don't spend 1 year creating your course. Because by the time that you finish your course, as you said, Florian, maybe the library will be deprecated or something. Or maybe somebody else will take the lead and just publish a course before you and just steal that kind of glamour that you're looking for, that kind of fame that you're looking for. So don't be perfectionist. I was spending 2-3 hours per video, per 10 minutes video to edit them. I found out really quickly that that was not productive. It was taking too much time. And as you start creating content and courses, something that I learned the hard way is that you should understand, and I think that Florian, you agree with me here, not all reviews will be positive. So not all the reviews that you're expecting for your product, your course, your blog, whatever, will be positive. So you need to expect to have some bad reviews. It's impossible for you to please everyone. What's important at the end of the day is that the ratio of good and positive reviews outbalances the one that you have in terms of bad reviews. And you need to accept this idea really quickly as you publish your product, because if you try to, if you see like a bad review, right, somebody complaining about your course, and you instantly feel down about it and just discouraged, and you have this kind of idea that I don't want to do this anymore because people are not enjoying my content, I'm clearly bad at it, right? So if you go with this kind of approach, you'll only hurt yourself. Why? Because there are certain people that will never enjoy what you do. And there are certain people that won't enjoy anything. And I've had a student at some point enrolling on my Jetpack Compose course that gave me 1-star review and said that he wanted to learn Room and architecture patterns and clean architecture. You need to understand that there are people like that expect something from something that it shouldn't be, right? So you need to get accustomed to that idea. And finally, something really important that you should know as you start gaining some revenue, some income, is that a course or a blog post, maybe a blog post, it's more like that, but a course will not be a passive income as everyone expects it to be. It's clearly not like that. I've had a certain lecture on my course about Coil, where you load images from the internet. And because Coil has changed their API 4 or 5 or 6 times, I had to update that lecture every time. And you have to also update the affected lectures, right? Because you can't only update one that contains it. So I had to go through a lot of trouble updating APIs. Also, as Compose was going from alpha to beta and to the release version 1.0.0, I also had to update API. So it's a continuous effort of you trying to update the course, to keep it up to date, and to also answer students' questions on the QA section, on the messages, answering reviews, trying to understand why people give you bad reviews. So it's a lot of time that you have to invest. It's not like you publish the course and then you receive money and that's it. Don't imagine it to be like that, because it doesn't. It's not like that.
Okay, so we had a lot of points here. Let me just quickly summarize this because I made a lot of notes. So when people consider creating Udemy courses or just content in general, because you don't have to create paid content right away, the first and most important thing is that they have to just start, right? Excuses, everyone comes up with excuses. Not having time is usually, when you say you don't have time for this and that, then you usually mean it's not a priority for you. We usually have time for all the stuff, unless we are a guy like Elon Musk or someone who has like 5 companies at the same time, there is time somewhere in the day. You might have to stop doing some other time-wasting activities. But there usually is time, so this is not an excuse. Then you said something interesting, which also when I asked people on YouTube what questions they have for you, someone mentioned the same thing you just mentioned, that they have self-doubt about creating content because they think, what qualifies me to talk about a topic? And you mentioned this, that you don't have to be an expert to teach something because you actually learn best by teaching something. And my approach to this is, I don't know if you noticed, but I started making YouTube tutorials very early after I started learning to code, like 3 months after I started learning to code. So I was a complete noob when I started. My approach with this always was just be honest about it. If you are honest about what you know, then you don't have anything to lose. It's just important that you don't try to trick someone, that you don't try to look like an expert that you are not. But if you're honest and say, okay, this is what I know, this is what I studied, and this is what I'm comfortable with explaining to someone else, then you can make content about this. Now, if someone is a complete beginner and doesn't have the real world experience, then he probably should not create paid content right away if he can't provide the quality. If you can't provide the quality because you don't have the experience yet, then start with free stuff. Start creating your audience on YouTube or Twitter or somewhere else where you can give programming tips. So this is one way to get around this feeling of not being good enough yet. Start by making free content and be honest about what you know. So this is also not an excuse that's valid. Equipment, the next thing, I hear that so often. This is the worst excuse, that I don't have the equipment. I don't understand this at all. Because when I decided to create YouTube tutorials, I started on the same day when I had this idea of creating YouTube content. I didn't want to wait a single day to start this. So for me, there was I don't have to buy the equipment. What I did was I bought like a 20 or 30 bucks microphone on Amazon. And there are actually a good microphones for that price. Now, the microphone I have now costed like 200 euros, but there are actually cheap microphones that have a good enough quality to get started. So this is also a garbage excuse. You can use your smartphone as your webcam. This is what we are both doing right now to record this. We use the Droidcam app to record this. Droidcam app, $5 or something for the premium version. So everyone can afford this. Yeah, cheap mics, and there is free open source software like OBS, for example. You can use OBS to record your screen, and this one is free. There's another one that's called, HitFilm is actually just for editing, I think. But with OBS, you can record your screen, right? So OBS definitely works.
Yeah.
So you don't need a lot of money to get started. Get a cheap mic, and worst case, you could even use your phone's mic to get started. Although audio is somewhat important for the quality, because having bad audio is really annoying for the viewer, but it shouldn't be an excuse to not get started. Then you mentioned that you have to be able to grind. This is, in my opinion, the hardest part, because when you start something, there's always this phase in the beginning where you're really motivated, intrinsically motivated, it's new for you, but earlier or later there will be a dip in motivation. Yeah, this is where many people stop. Many people start a YouTube channel and then they blast out content in the beginning, but then they realize that it's not growing that fast, and then they stop. This is a pattern that you can see really often. There is not really a trick for this or a secret sauce. You just have to find a way to stay consistent. Maybe by structuring your day. Maybe by using something like the Pomodoro technique, if this works for you. Just try out different techniques. What works really well for me is just having a daily schedule where I say exactly, okay, at this time, I have to sit down and do this task. And this works for me. But people have to find out what works for them. Also, a good approach that works for many people is to just set a small amount of time that you have to work on something each day. You can do longer than that if you want, but set a small goal. Say, for example, okay, every day after work for 30 minutes, I work on a course. I work on continuing this course. And you can actually get a lot done quickly if you just work for 30 minutes on it every day. Try something like that. You just have to see what works for you. Then you mentioned that you have to evaluate the idea and the topic you want to make a course about to make sure that you don't release something that no one actually wants to see. And this is also what an audience is useful for. So I never had this problem because I built my YouTube channel first and people already told me what they want to see. So this is another reason why I think it makes sense to start with free content first, because then you build an audience. An audience is not only useful for marketing, but they will also tell you what they want to see. And then you exactly know what you want to make, what you should make content about. For me, the problem is actually finding the motivation to create courses about these topics that people want to see. At the moment, I'm struggling with this a bit because I have been doing this for so long, and after a while, it's just, after a while, the motivation just wears out. But I exactly know what I should make courses about. If money was my main priority right now, then I would know exactly what people want to see from me. So this is what an audience is useful for. The difficult part is actually to stay consistent, as I already said. This is the only real difficult part in my example.
Yeah.
And practical examples. Yeah, this is something I mentioned before. People learn best by actually building stuff. And if you create a course, then it makes sense to have at least a part in it that takes the theory and actually applies it to a real project. This is a better way to learn, in my opinion, than just reading. Reading is way too passive. You can read for hours on end and not remember a single thing later, because this is just not how you learn programming. So this goes already into the details on what exactly to put into a course. But yeah, this is important. Let me just, one more second. Yeah, I made one more note, but I actually don't remember what this was supposed to mean. Okay, yeah, I know what I mean. You also mentioned that there are courses that cover too much stuff at once, and I have the same opinion. I watched a few of these courses where people try to explain huge topics and architecture and testing at the same time, and I was never a fan of this because they don't explain anything of this in detail. In my opinion, I've never seen a big course that covers a huge variety of topics that actually covers the single specific pieces of it in enough detail that you actually understand it. It's often just a lot of copy pasting. Okay, copy this huge class and then copy paste this and then just do what I did because this is how you're supposed to do it. There are some people who make courses like this, and I'm not a fan of this myself. I like to have more focused courses. Now, there shouldn't be too focused. You should probably not make a course on how to create a notification on Android. This is maybe a bit too small. That's good for a YouTube tutorial, but for a paid course, this is probably too small. But I'm not a fan of these courses that are like, here we learn clean architecture and testing and UI and Jetpack Compose and everything at the same time, because I've never seen a single course like this that was actually good. But maybe if people know good courses like this, then they can tell me in the comments below. And the last point, perfectionism, which was a problem for me. Yeah, perfectionism, and just in general, it's so easy to put too much focus and too much time and effort into stuff that doesn't actually matter, especially when it comes to editing videos. And this was what was happening to me. There was a point when I made YouTube videos when I would need like 2 weeks to create a single 10-minute tutorial because I put too much effort into it, way the wrong places. This is something that can easily happen, and I just had to fix this. I had to fix this on purpose. So I really had to pay attention where I put my time. And I really had to say to myself, no, this is enough. You don't have to put any more effort into this. You don't have to make this sound perfect. You don't have to make this cut or this animation perfect. Go ahead, keep it as it is, and just finish this project faster. This is also something that's really important, but this also comes down to practice. And there's no point in overthinking this. People just have to start and then see how it goes and then see what works for them. But yeah, I think this was a lot of really good points. Did you want to add anything to this?
The last 2 points. So just for our audience to have a quick recap, just remember that not all reviews are going to be positive. So whatever you're going to do, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be a 5-star course. That's impossible. It's impossible to please everyone, and you shouldn't try to do that. It's important what the majority says. And finally, whatever you do, don't try to think of it like a passive income. So don't try to think of your course or blog, something that you do right now, you invest some time right now, and then you can just completely forget about it. It's not like that, at least not in tech. Maybe in some other areas it could be, but in programming, that's really usually not the case.
Yeah, and your main social media marketing channel, so to speak, is Twitter, right?
Yeah, and I started really late. I started really, really late. And sometimes I wish I could invest more time, but having a job and having so many things on the side, it's difficult to also create an audience really fast. So as you said, in terms of marketing, just try to start marketing really soon, even though you don't have a product right now, right? As you said, even though that maybe you have some free content, whatever, you can start creating an audience. And as you said, that audience is really going to help you in so many ways.
Yeah, you said that you started late, but I don't want people to get the false idea they can still start right now. So there's still a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah.
And I watch Gary Vaynerchuk a lot. I don't know if you know him. He's a marketing guy, and he really knows his stuff. And he basically says that at the moment, this is the land grab of the internet. So at the moment is the opportunity for everyone to put their flag into the ground and build a social media presence. And building such a social media following is really useful for so many things. You can put out a course and you immediately have people who buy it. You can put out an app and you immediately have people who want to download it. You can do things like sponsorships and make money just because you have a following. So at the moment we are in this time where it's really realistic to turn yourself into a social media figure basically and build a large following. You just have to put out something useful, and people should do this because eventually this time where it's so easy will be over. And in the future, it will not be so easy anymore to build a following. And also when I wanted to ask, did you consider creating a YouTube channel? Because you don't have one right now, right?
Yeah, as I said, I'm trying to really expand my horizons, but it's something that I'm really looking into, and I'll probably do that soon, depending how my efforts are obviously split. But yeah, I think that YouTube is really important, and that's where I actually initially seen your tutorials, and I really enjoy them, and that's why I even recommend them to my Twitter audience. So having a YouTube audience, even Instagram, whatever, every kind of audience is beneficial, and it's a great step forward.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words about my stuff. To go a bit more about the specifics of creating a course, when you record, I know how to record a course, and I know what is difficult about this. Do you have any specific technique when you record, or do you just hit record and then you record until everything is done, and then you stop and you edit the video, or do you have any specific technique? And also, I guess you do the same that I do. You prepare the code beforehand and you probably have it on a second monitor, right? And then you just type out the stuff that you already have prepared, or do you do it differently?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and this is something that really bugged me in the beginning. I wanted to create a course, but I got to the technical parts. I had the idea of the project that I want to build, and I was wondering, how can I record this? And if you try to Google this specific issue of how do I record a programming tutorial or something like that, you won't really find the best solution. So I found, for example, a solution where it was saying that you should first record yourself. So you should first record you as you are coding, so the actual IDE, for example, as you start coding, and then afterwards you should voice over everything that you do. And I tried that, and it didn't make sense to me. It was really difficult because it was difficult for me to try to keep the pace with what I initially wrote, and then the voiceover would be sometimes not in sync with that. So it was difficult. So what I did, and what some tutorials don't advise you to do, but I think that you can do it, you can actually just record both the voice and the screen at the same time. Just make sure that you have, as you said, Florian, or maybe on a second monitor, or at least you have the idea in your mind. And this is another important thing that will help you, is try to make the actual lectures, the videos, as short as possible. Why? Because if you do that, you can kind of have granular portions of work, right? And in each video, if it has 4 or 5 minutes, you won't have to prepare that much beforehand. So you can actually go and say that, hey, in this video, I want to extract the state from the view to the view model, and you do that in a few minutes, and you don't have to have everything maybe on a second monitor or written down or whatever. So having short lectures is not actually beneficial for the reader, because most readers prefer that. I prefer that. I prefer having small chunks of videos when I'm learning something, but it's also helpful for you because you can just do these small bits and you don't have to prepare that much beforehand.
Yeah, it's easier to make smaller parts.
Yeah,
that's true. And I also record voice and the screen at the same time, because I find voiceover for coding tutorial feels a bit unnatural.
Yeah,
it looks and sounds and feels better, in my opinion, if you actually speak as you type. And it's also not difficult if you prepare the code beforehand. And even within a single video, I just go like this. I look at the code, I look at my notes because I've prepared a few notes, what I want to say, and then I code this part, and this takes maybe 2 minutes or something like that. And then I look at my notes again, and of course the parts in between I have to cut out later. But this is how I do it. So later you put your recording into your editing program, and then you will cut out the parts where you have breaks or they didn't work out.
Yeah.
And then you have a nice, good looking and good sounding tutorial.
That's something actually a mistake that I was doing really often. As you were saying, if I would find myself mistaking a word, or maybe I don't know, spelling a word not correctly, I would just cut the entire video and then start over. And then I realized that what you could actually do is just, okay, forget about it, get yourself together, right? And then continue the tutorial. And at the end, in the post-editing scene, you can just cut out those portions. And it's just much faster this way, much more proficient, obviously, than doing that. So this is a rookie mistake, if you will, that I've done it. And I think that our audience should maybe avoid it, because it's really time-consuming.
Yeah, this is definitely the hardcore mode of creating a course, where you start completely from scratch again when you did a mistake, or at least start the video over. But what you can also do is, a trick that Philip Luckner actually showed me is, I don't even record the small video at once. I record basically in 20-second to 3-minute increments. And what Philip does, and what I also do now, is I record a small increment, and if I do a mistake and this part is really bad, then I start over. But I only start over with this very tiny increment. And I've set up a few hotkeys for this on my PC, so I can do it very quickly. I did this with a tool called AutoHotkey. This is a Windows scripting language where you can create really elaborate hotkeys. Even if the software itself that you're using doesn't have these hotkeys, you can still create them in some way with AutoHotkey. And I basically press a button and I record a little part. If I do a mistake, either I cut it out later or I record this whole part again. But again, this is just a very small 30-second clip or something. And then I press a hotkey again that records the next part. And the benefit of this is that even if I do a lot of mistakes and have to repeat stuff, at the end I have to edit very little amount of footage. Because by scratching this whole clip that I just recorded, it's gone. I don't have to take care of it later anymore in editing. So in a 10-minute tutorial video, I usually have like 11 minutes of footage. I just have to cut the ends between each clip so they go together really nicely. And this is a nice way of recording, has saved me a lot of time. But there are also other tricks. I know what some people do is when they do a mistake somewhere, they clap in front of the microphone. So later when they see the audio in the editing tool, they can see where they clapped and they know, okay, this is where I have to cut. I don't know how this works exactly. You can look this up in Google, but there are different tricks to make editing more efficient. Have you ever considered hiring someone to edit your courses, or do you always want to do this yourself?
Yeah, so I was always one-man team. I don't think that it's really necessary to hire somebody. I've seen actually instructors that hire people to answer their QA questions. I don't know if they do that, for example, with the recording part. But if you ask me, it's fun. It's part of the process. And if I can do it, then it's fine. Maybe if you're like a very well-known teacher and that has hundreds of courses or something, you can afford to do that. But at least in the beginning, it's best for you to dip your toes into it, because you want to actually try to minimize your costs, right? So at least I haven't thought of it, and I actually find it really fun. So it really depends on you.
Yeah, I also have a bit trust issues when it comes to editing courses, not because I think someone steals something or anything like that, but because in order to edit a course properly, you also have to understand the topic, in my opinion, because you have to, I don't know, for example, I sometimes find mistakes in editing later, and then I want to correct these mistakes. And if I don't have this step, if someone else edit these videos for me, then I don't have to have this opportunity to find these mistakes. So I can't really imagine outsourcing the editing of a course, to be honest. I could imagine outsourcing the editing for the podcast, because this is just two people talking to each other that you don't have to know so much. But even there, I have a little bit of trouble of letting go, to be honest. But eventually it makes sense when you make enough money to outsource this, because you can do more of the stuff that actually matters, creating the footage in the first place. But for courses, it's tricky, in my opinion. But maybe this is just a weakness of me, because many people who do something like this have trouble letting go and actually delegating something to someone else. But I often hear that this is important because, yeah, you can use your time more intelligently.
Yeah.
Okay, we can also talk a bit about Udemy itself. So Udemy is the platform where you sell your courses, and I assume that you don't have the courses on another platform, or do you also have them somewhere else?
I also have them on Skillshare.
Okay.
Even though I would say that the majority of my audience is on Udemy, Skillshare is just like maybe a side platform where I initially started. I actually started with Skillshare. I didn't know about that well about Udemy, and I can safely say that if you want a decent start point, Udemy might be the best choice for you. Simply because there's just a huge amount of user base that can actually watch your course. Yeah,
Udemy is probably a nice place to get started. It's easier to set up than self-hosting your courses. Completely self-hosting is the most difficult way, where you have to take care of everything. And what people have to understand is the difficult part about self-hosting, in my opinion, is not building a website and putting videos on there. This is not difficult. You just set up WordPress and then you embedded videos from not from YouTube, because you can't really log them. So only people who paid for them can view them, but there are other video hosting services for these premium types of videos. The more difficult part, in my opinion, when it comes to this is taxes. For me, at least as a European, this is the most difficult, because if I sell a course to someone, I need a receipt is the word in English. Yeah. I need a receipt, some kind of invoice for that to show to my tax accountant. And maybe in other countries, this is a bit more relaxed, but this is the most difficult part. And I have to actually, everyone in the world has to pay that value added tax in Europe, for example. Or in the US, they have sales tax, which we actually have to pay. I know that a lot of people ignore this. They just don't pay these taxes, because if these taxes are in another country, they think nothing really can happen to them. But I want to make sure that I don't get in any trouble for this later. So I personally, I use a German course platform for my course I have, and they take care of all of the stuff of video hosting, but also of invoicing and texting everything properly. And Udemy also does this, I think. They also take care of the value-added tax in Europe, so you don't have to take care of this yourself. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest benefit actually of these platforms. It's not so much about just hosting the videos, it's about billing and taxing and all that complicated stuff. So this is why I would also start on such a platform.
I would also add that apart from this kind of taxing, which is a really great point, obviously you don't want to beat your head with this kind of stuff in the beginning. You just want to publish your course. I think that something that's really important for you to have if you want to host your service, your courses independently, right? So you use some sort of self-hosting, maybe a platform like Teachable or something that actually helps you with the hosting, but it gives you more independent access to your course. If you want to go on your own and not depend on platforms like Udemy, Skillshare, whatever, and you want to try to I don't know, maybe increase your revenue, right? Because Udemy, as any other platform, takes a share of your income. If you want to do that, it's also important to have a audience, right? So we go back to that. If you can't market or you don't have an audience that you can sell the course, well, imagine if I would have done that a few years back and I didn't have an audience, right? I'm still struggling to build one right now. And if I would have done that, I would probably have 0 students because, well, not 0, but maybe a few that I would ask them to get the course. But without having an audience that buys your courses, it's really difficult to self-host your courses. You need to make sure that you have people that want that content. So make sure that you have that before going on this route.
And Udemy helps with this a bit, right? They have some internal mechanism where they promote.
So they have like they have this huge user base, right? So the actual organic, they call them organic traffic from their students that are trying to learn new technologies, right? So you have that on one side. You also have a lot of things like affiliates, and you also have Udemy doing sort of campaigns or ads for you, trying to sell your course. So they really go and try to help you. And obviously they also take a pretty big share because of that. So they help you gain students much easier than other platforms. Yeah.
So what kind of fees do you have to pay on Udemy?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but for most of the, for example, the actual students that you obtain from their paid ads, they take at least 65% or even more than that. For students that are organic, I think that's a bit lower, maybe 40% or something, but they still take a pretty big chunk of your revenue because of that. So ideally, if you have a successful course and you have an audience, Udemy might not be the best option for you because you can just maximize that profit and not give it to platforms like Udemy. But in my case, since I didn't have an audience, it helped me, and it was obviously a trade-off, as with everything, in terms of revenue.
I remember on Udemy, it was like this, that when you brought someone else by yourself, you didn't have big fees. Or did they change this meanwhile?
No, you're right. So if you bring your own students, you would get, I think, 95 or 100% of the sale. So you can still do that and kind of have the best of both worlds, if you like.
Yeah, so people have to understand that even though you have to give them a big chunk, you basically don't have another choice if you don't have an audience, because no one buys your course if they don't know you, if they don't follow you, if you didn't already show them that you know what you're talking about. So you have to build your brand first, or start with something like Udemy. Also, you mentioned Teachable. I put my course on Teachable first, and I actually like them because they are like in between self-hosted and something like Udemy. They give you more flexibility. They take a smaller cut. They actually do take care of taxes and even European value-added tax. So they take care of this. The reason why I moved away from them is, first of all, we have some more strict laws in Germany when it comes to how we are supposed to show prices and everything. And they were not completely compliant with that. But also what bothered me, they actually did not take care of all taxes in the whole world. So that they took care of the US and Europe, but I know that there were some countries where they didn't implement this yet. They didn't take care of this. And I think the danger that something happens to you if you don't pay sales tax in a third party country, the reason that actually something happens there is probably almost zero. But still, I prefer to be completely safe when it comes to this.
Yeah.
So I was looking for a platform that is compliant with all the stuff, pays taxes in every country where I have to pay taxes, even though I know that I make less money, because European value-added tax is actually a ton. It's like 20% on average, that they just take away from your price, 20%, and on the rest you still have to pay income tax. So you really lose a large chunk of money. I can understand that some Americans don't want to pay this, but as a European, I have to pay this anyway. And I wanted to be safe. I just wanted to say that Teachable is still a good option for people who have an audience already, but don't want to set up their own website, because this is a little bit more difficult again. The only thing that, or not the only thing, but the main thing that bothers me about Udemy is that they have these huge discounts all the time. What is up with that? Because it seems really fishy to me, to be honest. Like everything is discounted for 90% all the time. What's up with that? And in your opinion, do people actually buy your courses for the full price? Or is this price just something that never someone actually buys for?
Yeah, so this is a great topic, because when you start creating courses, you also maybe think of that financial side, right? How much will I obtain after somebody purchases my course, right? And if you have this kind of maybe bad luck, or I don't know how I can call it, if you check out Udemy when there's not a sale and you see all the courses 100 euros, 200, 120 bucks or something, you would say, oh, Jesus, I'm going to take such a huge amount of money for this course, right? And I think that this is the future. This is what I want to do, right? You're instantly really happy because the prices are high. But I hate to break up. I don't want to break this really to you like that, but you won't really receive that full amount. Because as you said, Udemy always does sales. I'm not sure why they do that. I probably understand the reasoning, because most people will buy the course when it's cheaper, like 10 or 12 bucks, right? But I don't think that anyone will buy them with the highest price. And I think that a good question of yours was that if somebody actually bought my course as a full price. I think I've had, I don't know, a few people, right, that did that. I don't know what I actually do is that when this happens, I just offer them a free promo code for my other course, because it's obviously a sacrifice that they did to buy it full price. And most of the time, 99.99% of the cases, you will get the corresponding revenue for a course at 10 or 12 bucks. It's not going to be like that. So you need to think of your expected income based on this kind of figures, right? So and something else that's really important for you to start out on this journey. Don't imagine that with Udemy, obviously, and we spoke already about this, you will take the full amount. If you can refer students, yes, you will take the full amount. But if you can't, well, you will probably end up with $3 or $4 or $5 per sale. And it often happens to me that Udemy has this kind of policy of adjusting the price depending on the country. And I think that this makes sense. And this is one of their practices that actually makes sense. You don't want to have a fixed price for everybody in the world, because everybody has different economies and different whatever, right? So it's not first for somebody, let's say, with a country that has maybe a really bad economy to have the full price as we have in some of the European countries, right? So it's not fair to them. So what Udemy does is just adjust that price to their country. And I've had people that bought my course for $3 or $4, depending on their location, right? So if they were in a country like India, I've had students that were able to buy it for $3 or $4, and I received not under $1, so something like $0.99 for a sale. And this happens. It happens. So you have to be prepared for that. You will receive low prices for maybe the 10 hours of content, 20 hours of content that you will provide. So this happens, and you should be prepared for it. It's not always $10 per student. And this brings me to another topic, because I've seen students that were really upset about courses, and they were saying that I've paid $10 or something like that for this course, and it's not even teaching me I don't know what else, right? But you have to think of the content creator, that they're usually not receiving your full amount. They're usually ending up with $2, $3, or $4, right, for what you have paid. So it's not fair to say that. And once you think of it from that angle, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's not that huge of amount that the instructor receives from you. So it's not fair to ask like the moon from him, right? So yeah.
Yeah, but if you said that you can already live from it and that's only for 2 courses, then it still seems very profitable.
Yeah, again, it depends where you live, right? So it's also about that. For example, people that have a lower cost of living means that they can build and sell courses and actually live of it much easier and faster than somebody from a country that has maybe much higher expenses, right? So in my case, it sometimes happens to be a good sum that allows me to live off of it. But sometimes it's not enough. And if I would be in a country, as I said, like a very developed country state in the US, it wouldn't really be enough even for a rent or something, right? In New York, you have rents like 10K or something. So yeah. It depends. It really depends. But if you are consistent about it and you publish new courses and you kind of invest a lot of time in it, yeah, you will be able to live off of it at some point.
Yeah, if you want to make the real big money, then you have to build your own audience and self-host
Exactly.
them. I'm in contact with a lot of other YouTubers that create paid courses, and they usually make like 5 digits in their release week and stuff like that. So there's really a lot of money in making courses. Some of them make 6 figures in the first month of launching a new course or something like that. But this is not easy. You have to do a lot of marketing for this, and they are really good with this. Like they build their email lists and they know how to warm the email list up. And there's a lot. I find it incredibly hard to do this properly. But this is where the real money is, basically. But people should not imagine this to be easy. It's definitely not easy. Creating the course is difficult and marketing it is difficult as well. But this should still not stop you from getting started, because you have to start somewhere and practice and just get better. Again, I would start with free content usually, just to get good at making content first, building an audience, learning how marketing works, and then eventually make a paid course.
If you want to, for example, just to give our audience a bit of context, if you want to understand how how important an audience can be, there's an example with a very popular Twitter account that has received, I think, 20 or 30,000 of follows in less than a month, right? And at some point, that particular person that already had built a huge audience, obviously, asked the following question: if I would write an ebook, right? Would you buy it, or something like that? It was something across these lines, right? Along these lines, and everybody in the comment section was like, "Yeah, I would buy it, even if it's about Twitter growth or if it's about something else, I will buy it." So the importance is that if you have an audience, it's very easy to get started and to sell basically everything.
Was it a specific account you were talking about, or was this just...
If you heard of Coding Yuri, she was able to get, last time I checked, it was 24,000 if I'm not mistaken, but again, a huge amount of followers, and it was really interesting to see that people were excited about buying a product an actual product that doesn't even exist right now, right? So talking about a waiting list, right? This is something that makes an audience really important, and most of it I mean, this thing is so cool that she even received a job, right? So within 2 months of Twitter or something less than that, she also received a job offer, right? She was learning programming, she didn't have experience, and she got a job offer, right? So I think that an audience can make wonders.
Yeah, definitely. This cannot be overstated how important it is to build an audience. And what I also wanted to ask is, did you have any problems yet with piracy? Did people steal your course, maybe upload them somewhere else, or didn't you have problems with that yet?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I've had problems, and people actually, I think, will go to by any means trying to pirate your content in whatever niche you are in. It doesn't matter. I've seen my courses being uploaded to several really weird Russian or whatever websites that were available for free to download, and it obviously felt bad because I knew how much work I've spent, and I knew how much work I've put into that and how much time I've spent, and it obviously was something that didn't make me happy. But again, this is a lesson, right? What's really to take in from here is that whatever you do, you won't be able to defeat piracy. It's just impossible. People will eventually do it. What you have to do is to just get over it and make sure that you update your content really frequently, because if you do that, right, and you invest the time into updating your content, well, all of those things that are pirated, well, they won't be able to keep up with your content, right? So I've seen my course actually for free on a website, but it was in a very early day. So right now my course is much more updated with new sections. So I don't know if it makes sense for someone to actually download it from there. But I think that the main point here is that I don't know if it has happened to you, Florian, but I think that it happens to most of us.
Yeah, it hasn't happened to me with my one course I have, but I think the reason for this is that it's pretty expensive. Actually, when I released it, it was more than $100. Yeah. This is one downside of creating memberships, because many course creators have memberships where they pay like $20 or $30 per month and they have access to all courses. And I actually see this happen to some of these people, or to pretty much all of them, that someone goes in there, buys 1 month for $30 or something, downloads all courses, and then uploads them somewhere else. This is the problem with this approach. Whereas when you create single courses without a membership, where each course has its own price, then this is much more difficult, because then they have to buy all the courses one by one to actually get them.
Well, if you have a refund policy, well, you're again in a pickle, right? Because it can still happen. And one thing here that I would like to add is that even though you kind of try to take all the measures, right? For example, my videos are not downloadable, right? They cannot be downloaded. And that basically means that nobody should be able to pirate those videos. And it still happened, right? So again, it's something that you can try to be as good as possible to prevent that. As you said, maybe have a separate and a high price, right? But it's still not a 100% chance.
Yeah, 100% definitely not. Especially in Germany, we have to have a refund policy of 2 weeks. So this is not even optional for us. But still, there is a much bigger barrier in, getting one courses and asking for a refund maybe is easy, but I would notice if someone does this all the time. I mean, they could make different accounts, but still there's more of a barrier to this, when you actually have to actively ask for a refund, than when you just need this 1 month fee and can download everything at once. So I think this still avoids this problem a little bit, but it's actually not that important, I think, because what I heard before, and I think it was Tim Ferriss, who said that you should just see this as marketing, because these people who download your courses for free, they wouldn't buy them anyway, in most cases. The people who pirate stuff and don't pay for it ever, they usually wouldn't buy it anyway. They would just not watch it if this was the only alternative. So you should actually see this as marketing, because it's people, it's eyeballs on your content that you would otherwise not have. So this is a way to reframe this, to see it more positively. Of course, it's annoying, but as you already said, you can't stop piracy. As long as the internet is there will be piracy probably. And now I would go a little bit away from actually creating courses, unless you want to add something to this. Do you have any more tips when people want to create their own courses?
No, I think that we have covered a lot of points for people starting out, and if they are able to follow them and not make the same mistakes that we've done, I think that should be a good starting point for them.
Yes, definitely. And again, they should just get started and don't find so many excuses.
Yeah.
Unless they don't want to do it, of course. If that's not in their interest, then they don't have to. But I think what would also be interesting for people is not only how to create courses, but also how to learn effectively from courses.
Yeah.
Because this is also difficult. Do you have any tips or maybe any mistakes people do when let's say they buy a course from you on Udemy and they want to learn from it? What approach would you tell them, or what tips would you give them to learn from the courses as effectively as possible?
Yeah, so we've talked about right now about consistency, right? About trying to not only publish one course, but be kind of resilient and keep on doing it until you are successful. This obviously applies in scenarios where you are actually learning something. You want to be consistent. You don't want to just start a course or a tutorial and then ditch it afterwards because you have lost your interest or you have found maybe something of more interest. So what I would actually advise you is to set some kind of deadlines, right, for each and every activity that you set your mind to. I think that deadlines and goals that are attached to deadlines make the most sense and make you responsible of what you are trying to achieve. If you just set your mind into buying a course, right, and you buy it and then you start learning it and you have no schedule, no daily schedule maybe, or no end goal with a deadline, you will just end up procrastinating. And I've done this. I think that we have all done this, and I think that this is one of the most difficult things to pass and to overpass, right? You have to be consistent and you have to have that kind of responsibility to have this kind of deadline, right, in which you say, by the end of the month I want to have finished this course, right? I want it done. And I think that this kind of approach, right, of always procrastinating and not finishing things that we even buy. I think you have heard this on Twitter. This is already a common phrase that, yeah. But also, the fact that people buy Udemy courses and they actually never start them. Not talking about actually finishing them, right? So there were people saying that I've bought 2 or 3 or 4 courses, 10 courses, and I haven't even started them. That's one thing that you should get past, right? You should obviously start it and being consistent about it and try to have this kind of mentality of finishing it. And I can tell you that from the statistics, from Udemy, I can tell you that only a very small margin of my students actually finish the course. And again, you might say as a teacher, that's disappointing, but no, that's human nature. That's what we do. We always start something and we end up not finishing it. So there's a huge chunk, I think maybe 40 or 50% that actually don't get past the first half of the course, right? An 11-hour course. So this is really important, right? Because this speaks of the mentality of the actual students, right? And in fact of ourselves, right? Because we kind of start something and we don't finish it. So the most important advice that I would give you is that to set a deadline. I want to finish this by the end of the month, by the end of the year. And when that time comes and you see that you haven't finished it, you will feel bad about yourself and you'll say that I had a responsibility, I have failed myself, and this shouldn't happen anymore, right? So you try to go from there. Other people actually have joined the trend of 100 days of code, and I'm sure that you are familiar with it. And that basically tries to give you some social responsibility, right? That you have started something and that you do not want to feel bad about not tweeting again about it, because it would mean that you have stopped learning and that you are not a dependable person, or you're just not really that good about keeping promises, right? So I think that this is something as a first tip I would give to everybody starting out.
Yeah, Buying courses and also books and not finishing them is really common. I'm also guilty of this myself.
Yeah,
For
me
example,
too.
I needed a while until I really started working through the Clean Code book by Uncle Bob, because it's work, of course, and it's easy to just not look at it anymore. And as I already mentioned, what works best for me is scheduling this actually into a calendar and saying, okay, at this time I work on this, even if it's just for 30 minutes or an hour per day or whatever. And actually, this is also the idea of the app I've built, this little app I have on the Play Store. I was not planning to promote this here, but the idea of the app is that you set time goals for specific tasks for each day or for certain days of the week. For example, you want to continue this course for 30 minutes per day. And this app gives you this timer every day that you have to finish, and then it shows you how many, like a habit tracker, it shows you how many days in a row you finished this and when you slacked off, and it gives you statistics. So this was the idea for this app, because I had problems with the same thing, not finishing these courses, buying them and then not finishing them or not even starting them. Of course, that's great for the person who sells the course. Maybe it's not good for his ego, but when someone doesn't look at the course, he probably also doesn't refund it because
Yeah.
they don't know if it's good or bad. So from a egoistical point of view, this is actually useful. But of course, for someone who buys the course, it's not a good approach.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to find a way to handle this, and people just have to experiment with this. Different things work for different people. As you already
Yeah.
said, this social accountability is something that works for many people. Some people, they just have to announce it publicly, and then they have enough pressure behind it to actually finish this.
Exactly.
It's not really my approach, or at least I haven't tried it. But yeah, people just have to experiment a bit because they need to find a way to actually finish the stuff. Otherwise, you don't really get ahead, or don't buy courses. This is also an option. If you know that you always buy these courses and then you don't start them or you don't finish them, then maybe just stop buying courses. Of course, for people like us who want to sell courses, it's not great, but for some people, courses are maybe not the right approach. And you can also learn the stuff by Googling and looking through Stack Overflow answers and applying the stuff yourself and practicing on your own app. But yeah, you just have to see what works for you.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to add, but we already said this before, that it's also for someone who is learning from courses, it's important to not only watch it passively, but actually apply the stuff you learn there.
Yeah.
And often the instructor of the course already gives you opportunities to do that. They give you little practice examples or code you can practice on. But what I'm also a fan of, for example, when I go through Google Code Labs, which are these small text tutorials, what I like is I apply it to their example code first, but then I immediately go ahead and apply it to my own project if there's an opportunity for that. Because this is then, it's like the next step, it's like the next difficulty level. Because
Yeah.
then you don't have a solution for that. It's like an additional homework. You have to often change this example in a certain way to be able to apply it to your code, because your code is different. So I think this is a nice way to practice this. And it's also fun because it's your own project, and working on your own project is usually at least a little bit fun, even if it's difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are good points on how to learn effectively from courses. On Twitter, I think you also told me that you wanted to talk a little bit about how to get started on Android in general, right?
Yeah. I think that this is something that would really interest our audience, right? Because I've received a lot of questions from people that are just starting out on Twitter, learning Android, obviously, and there's this problem here that right now developers face, and that problem is usually, how do I start? I mean, I think that, as you mentioned, the tutorial hell is a real problem, right? And the fact that we have so many resources and so many information, it's a blessing, but at the same time, it's also a curse, because you don't know how to exactly start. I mean, if you Google Android tutorial on the internet, you won't have a roadmap, and you won't have this kind of guidance that you would need in order to know what to learn, right, and how to learn it, right? These are like some very important points, and I've had friends starting out on Android, and I tried to give them the best advice I could. So I thought that we could share some of them here, and I think that the first one we have already covered, and it was about being accountable and having deadlines and goals about your learning, because without having this set from the beginning, well, you will have problems probably along the road of being consistent and actually finishing what you are starting. So apart from that, you also mentioned something really important, and that is the actual official code lab that usually Google offers for every kind of concept or library that they release. And I think that before trying to Google a tutorial right about Android, or before trying to buy a course, even though obviously that will not make my sales go any higher, but I think that the best thing is to start with official code labs. This is what I actually advise everyone, because they provide you the actual hands-on experience that you want to have in the beginning. And recently, Android also released some official tutorials that are really similar to the Code Lab experience, right? And I think that these are the first things that you want to touch upon. They should be the first contact with Android that you should have as a developer. I wish I had them much better organized at the time I started, because they were pretty crazy. They didn't have the same structure and consistency as they have now. So I think that this is a great starting point. So what I would usually do, as you said, I would try to work on or this is what I actually do right now. Some of the times when I learn something new, I go through a code lab, I try to apply on their code, and I also try to apply it on my projects, or I try to create a new project from scratch. Because when you actually learn something, it makes sense when you follow a tutorial, which is step by step. But at the end of the day, if you try to actually go through that process from the beginning without looking at the code lab, this will really test your skills, and this will really test the way that you have actually absorbed that information, right? It will really test your capability of remembering how things should be done and how they work, right? And obviously you shouldn't remember anything on top of your mind, but the point is that you should try to always do things on your own afterwards on projects, because that's how you actually gain the practical experience, right? So again, this is something that I would start off with. You can buy courses later, and you can buy anything else later, but the immediate contact point with Android should be with official documents, labs, whatever, because they will give you that kind of consistency that some of the times the courses won't, and they will give you that starting point. And something that I learned the hard way is that even though you're starting out as a programmer right now, be it on Android, whatever stack you're using, and this is generally wide available, right? You should learn to use a versioning system like Git, for example. Why I'm saying this, I'm not saying that you should learn Git for your job, right? Because even though I think that's important for a job as well, but it's not really essential for your first job. But I think that you should learn it for yourself and for your mental health, because when you are in the first steps, right, you will probably get things wrong very often. And instead of just going undoing everything, Control Z everything, and trying to go back to the previous state of the code, what really helped me in the beginning was using Git. I would try to have branches and commits for every change, and having the ability to go back to the previous version that I knew that was working did wonders. And believe me, if you show a Git to somebody that has struggled with this for some while, that person will probably believe that you're showing him the almighty power of programming and coding. It's something that will help you get past the mistakes that you do, because it's very easy to mess up the code in the first stages. I mess up the code as we are speaking right now, even though I have a few years of experience. So it's something that will really save you a lot of frustration, right? You get something working, properly, you should save that as a commit or a branch, whatever, and then you can start experimenting. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to work on those practical projects that we have spoken about. So again, for your sanity, I would advise you to learn Git. Don't go into in-depth details, whatever, branching strategies. No, just try to understand how it works, and how this will save you a lot of time and nerves and a lot of rage along the way that you are starting out right now. So yeah, this is something that I would advise, and I would continue our discussion in terms of tips with a more unpopular opinion. I would say that if you are in your early beginnings, I would say that libraries on Android, specifically the Jetpack libraries, but also other libraries that are, very common and popular, all of these libraries, they are your friend, and you should make them your friend really soon. And I know that many experienced or senior devs will disagree with me right now, because they will say that libraries are evil and they kind of bring fragility to your code. And I agree with all of that. But in your early beginnings, I think that libraries will help you abstract those nasty implementation details that others have taken care of, so you can focus on creating apps and having them shipped and having them built. And they actually create you that sensation that you can build an app really fast and that you are good at what you do. Obviously, along the road, you have to understand why you are using them. And this is a very important topic. As I've said, I've held interviews at my company dozens of times for new members. And something that I've seen and that really bugged me really bad was that people were using libraries and they already had some experience, right? So I'm not really talking about people that are starting out, but people just started maybe using them in the beginning, and then they forgot about understanding why they should use them. So when I would ask somebody why do they use Dagger in their projects, they would say, well, because it's recommended by Android, right? So I thought I would give it a try. And I would always say, but why? I mean, you need to understand why you're adding a library to your project. What are the benefits? What are the costs? And why are you actually using it? What's that library doing for you? This is something that I would advise you to do, maybe not in the very early steps, because you might melt your brain. You don't want to start with everything from the beginning, but you need to take care of this really, really soon. And heck, after all, you can, after that, you can actually create your own implementation, just like YSS was doing. So you can go into more in depth, and you can have discussions whether libraries are bringing fragility to your code, which I can agree. Again, this is contextual, and it can depend on some projects. It can be more effective or maybe less effective for other projects. It can make sense for some of them. It can make less sense for others. But until then, it's really important to make libraries your friend, use them so you can ship really fast, because at the end of the day, as a junior, this is what will help you. This is what will actually get you a job, right? Knowing to work with libraries, because companies want that, and having the ability of building apps and shipping them. And again, after you do that, make sure that you understand why you use them, right? And what they do behind the scenes. These are essential things. If you overlook them and you can just go along the path of not understanding what you are using and why you are using, this is going to be very bad on long term, and that's not something that you should do. But in the beginning, they should be your friend. And I guess that this is something that I really want to stress. Even though even if you hear senior developers telling you that, hey, you shouldn't use RxJava because you couple your project with other dependencies, or you shouldn't use a navigation component, or whatever other library. I always try to respond to that this kind of tactic makes sense in their context, because they have the experience, they understand what those libraries actually do, how they work behind the scenes, and they can replace them maybe with some more light efficient libraries. But for beginners, this kind of libraries really help you out, and they can give you the speed that you need, right, to deliver projects. And that's what matters at the end of the day for a company, at least when you're a junior.
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of libraries. First of all, as a beginner, as a beginner, I would use all the popular libraries because
Yeah.
it's just too difficult to write. Even writing something like a view model yourself, I would use Jetpack view model as a beginner, and I also use it right now because it's actually not as maybe writing a view model is not that difficult without Jetpack, but writing a lifecycle aware observable
Yeah.
stakeholder, that's definitely difficult. So I think for beginners, there's no point in trying to come up with something like this yourself. But there are also libraries that I think even real good professional developers don't have problems with, like Retrofit. I don't
Yeah.
think I don't think there are many people who would say that Retrofit should be written by yourself. Those are really popular libraries. But I know that many people are not fans of Jetpack libraries. Jetpack navigation is not very popular. Jetpack view model is also not very popular. So those are the libraries that many of these more experienced developers try to write by themselves. But again, for beginner, that doesn't really make much sense, I think.
One point that I would like to reinforce is that even if you are an experienced developer, right, and you have the ability of maybe writing it by yourself, I always take this kind of concept of not reinventing the wheel, right? You must have heard about you must have heard of this expression, right?
Yes.
Don't try to reinvent the wheel, right? Because again, this is contextual. In some context, it might make sense, but in other it might not make sense. So say for example that you want to have maybe a lightweight version of RxJava, right? To have maybe you want to build yourself some sort of live data because you only want to keep it on the presentation layer, right? You don't need the complexity that and all the operators that RxJava needs. So you build yourself some sort of a live data. I don't know. Well, in that context, it makes sense because you make sure that your code, your project is not fragile to change, right? And you make sure that when Google will deprecate that library, you won't have to do anything. And this is something that I really understand and it makes sense. But again, if you try, for example, to go on this kind of route of reinventing the wheel, for example, the good example that you have given is Retrofit. I wouldn't see too much sense trying to reinvent the wheel for those kind of libraries. So again, it's a matter of context. If it makes sense for you and your context, if your startup allows you to actually build your own library for your own purpose because you need some specific new things, yeah, don't try to, I don't know, bend the Android architecture view model as you wish. You can build yourself a more specific version of it. But again, if it's something that you will build and that will be probably identical with the view model, with the Jetpack view model, right? And maybe your implementation won't have all the implementation details that one has, and maybe some other bugs. At the end of the day, you have reinvented the wheel and you haven't done anything productive, right? You should have stick with the official one.
Yeah, that's right. And what I also wanted to say is you mentioned the code labs, and I also usually start with learning from the code labs. They're usually really good. And for Jetpack Compose, there's also this official learning path where there's a list of code labs and some YouTube videos and some Medium articles, I think. And I also found this really useful. Where did you learn Jetpack Compose from?
Yeah, well, at the time that I've learned about it, there weren't too many code labs. I basically tried to also follow those tutorials that were in alpha, that were written. Maybe most of the time I would go to the official documentation. But I also think I followed a few code labs. But again, right now we have much more code labs on Compose. So in the beginning, it was pretty difficult to find too many resources. But the thing about Jetpack Compose is that it's really easy to use. And it's just natural and it's very intuitive, right? It's based on the Kotlin APIs, so it's not like a completely different I don't know, framework, if you will, that you need to like always check the documentation, always try. So it's very easy to learn and to experiment, and this is what I found, that it was very nice to experiment on my own and try different things because everything was really easy to, I don't know, to explore, if you will. So it was difficult in the beginning, but as I was trying to play with it, I kind of fell in love with it. I already worked with Flutter and React Native, and I can tell you that, I mean, as you know, they have the same kind of declarative paradigm approach, but they weren't as fun as Jetpack Compose. The actual widgets and the actual language, for example, in Flutter Dart I didn't like it, honestly. It wasn't as fun as Compose is. So if somebody here right now is hearing this, and they are torn apart whether they should start learning Compose or not, I think that Compose is just so fun, and I think that they will have so much fun playing around with it, and they will eventually like it. So yeah, that's mainly the point about it.
Okay, so and of course, now that your course is out, people can learn Jetpack Compose from there. So I'll put your course into the show notes. And are there any things you don't like about Jetpack Compose, or is it just completely positive for you compared to XML?
Yeah, so I think that there are things that sometimes bother me, but I think that all of these details, like for example, sometimes the syntax doesn't really seem that clear for some APIs. I think that sometimes the ID, for example, doesn't import what it should import, right? So if you try to bundle all of this together, sometimes I don't like some of the stuff. But if you would be to, try to weigh all of these things that you don't like and try to think of the alternative, which is obviously XML with the view system, you would see that the actual scale of things that you don't like in XML is much higher. So again, if you just have to try to think of the pros and cons, and if you have more pros, right, for a Jetpack Compose than you have for XML, and obviously this goes around for cons. If you have less cons or more cons, you just need to try to balance this. And if you think that you can have much more fun with the other one because you have less things that you dislike and more things that you like, you should go with Jetpack Compose, or maybe stay with the Android view system. I can't really say that I found things that I don't like. I've heard misconceptions about it, like people complaining that maybe the actual preview is not working that well, or maybe that they shouldn't, that their functions or their UI becomes really bloated, right? Because as you know, the declarative approach, this kind of declarative approach where you define widgets like that, kind of tends to grow your lines of code really well, right? So for maybe a few elements of UI, you gain a lot of numbers of lines, and they kind of complain and say that no, my UI just impossible to read. And I always try to counter this. So for the first thing with the preview, I always try to counter this, that the Jetpack library, these Jetpack libraries, or Compose to be more precise, is still early. I mean, okay, it's stable, it's the first version, but you can't really compare it with the XML and the view system that has been around for so many years, right? It's just a bit too early to jump on board and say that no, I don't like that. It's soon. Things will eventually mature, and all of these kind of unpleasant things might soften out in the future. And for the second thing that I've often heard, even from my students, saying that their UI is very hard to read because they have a lot of composables, right? And it's just difficult to understand. I always tell them that it's not really Jetpack Compose's fault, it's their fault, because they should try to refactor and to structure their composables in a way that they don't have a composable function of 200 lines or 300 lines or something like that. It's just the way that you actually design your UI, and you have to refactor it and extract composables, not just keep all the UI in one composable function. And this is obviously this thing stands for Flutter, right, and for React Native. So in there, I was having the same issues. I would have huge UI because there would be the same tendency of the UI to grow with all of those widgets and all that stuff. And again, the fault was not really of the system, right? It was not really the fault of React Native or Flutter, or in this case, Jetpack Compose. It was my fault as a developer because I needed to make sure that the UI is correctly extracted and the composables are really well defined.
Yeah, what is a bit difficult for me with Compose are these different side effect methods. This is a bit tricky in my opinion, because there are so many of them. Like there's side effect and launched effect and disposable effect and derived state of. And I never really
Yeah.
know when to use which one, but this is just practice, basically. It's just something you have to get used to, I guess. But this is something I find tricky about Compose.
I mean, I've also had issues with the effects, right? Until I understood that maybe a launch effect is a good effect that has to be used when you try to launch a query or something that has to be has to happen just once and not across recompositions, right? So there are a lot of quirks that we have to get used to, and obviously this kind of style of defining your UI, declarative approach is very different to what we are used to. It's obviously a huge change, but if there's something that is, I don't know, I would say in common for all developers, and you can see this really more for the senior experienced developers, is that they are resistant to change. And I think that, again, this is something natural. This is something in our nature, right? If, for example, you're living in your house and you're fine and somebody gets you out and you have to live in a different house, right? You'll have this kind of, I don't know, feeling that you don't belong to that place, right? So there's this kind of resistance to change. And it's natural. And this happens when you change any kind of technology stack, right? If you move from web to mobile and vice versa, you'll have this kind of resistance to change. So you'll try to maybe find yourself more in the previous stack or in the previous library. So again, this is something normal. And as you start to gain experience with it, as you start to play around with it more, you'll find that this kind of feeling of resistance towards a library will eventually soften out. And I'm saying that this happens really often. I've heard developers that are just like pro Java and they are really against Kotlin. I've heard developers that favor a library more than they favor another one. For example, people that are still big fans of libraries that maybe right now don't make too much sense, that maybe are deprecated or whatever. For example, the synthetics API, that's an API that I really liked. But I understand I have to use the view system because there were the view binding, because there were some limitations, right? So again, this kind of resistance to change is natural. And again, you will see developers that are advocating for other libraries, and it's normal. It's something that is part of us.
Yeah, change is always uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
you have to get used to it as a programmer. Otherwise, you get left behind. And what I really like about Jetpack Compose is that you have the single source of truth for your composables and not like an XML. Where I always use this example of a checkbox, because when you put in a checkbox into your layout with XML, then even if you didn't wire up any code, you could start the app and you could check this checkbox and uncheck it, and it would actually have this animation where it's ticked and unticked. And this means that this view itself has its internal Boolean value for if the checkbox is checked or not. And when you have a bug in your code, you never really know if this is actually also the same value that you have in your view model for the checked value of this checkbox. So there are these two sources of truth that makes it harder to debug your code. But in Compose, because the checkbox in Compose only has the value that you pass to this function, the Boolean value, true or false, for checked or not checked. And this way you know when the checkbox is checked, then also the Boolean that you pass to this checkbox function, to this composable function, is true. And this way you know that your value that you have in your view model and the checkbox state are always in sync. There's only the single source of truth. And this makes it less likely to introduce bugs in your code. So this is really right now, this is the main benefit I've seen from Compose, that it makes it less likely to add these bugs.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, I've seen this kind of approach, and I always tried to bypass it somehow, to hold the UI state in the view model and have the view model the only source of truth. And what's great about Compose is that the actual idea of unified or unidirectional flow of data that you have spoken about, and the idea of declarative widgets, right, declarative composables, this basically means that, okay, what I receive as a composable, this is what defines me, right? This is the state that I'm going to display. I don't have any kind of third-party actor that will come and mutate my state and produce, I don't know, this kind of weird state that you don't know how to debug. Because with the views and the XML, you would have this really often, right? You'd have the view that would mutate the views, the activity or the fragment that would mutate the views in the XML. And the problem with that was that you would have different methods that would change different properties and different setters for those views, and you would basically never know what has caused that final state, or you would end up with illegal states and weird states that you would have to debug, mostly because there wouldn't be that kind of source of truth that you have spoken about.
Yeah, I also think Jetpack Compose is it's the future way of writing UIs, and I don't have much, I don't have experience at all basically with stuff like iOS, but I think their UI system is similar to Compose. Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, so at the time that I started learning Jetpack Compose, I also started learning Swift UI, right, for iOS, mostly because I'm a big fan of Kotlin Multiplatform. Even though I haven't had the chance to play around with it, I'm planning. It's on my to-do list. And what I actually said was that, okay, I want to learn how to build UI with Jetpack Compose. And I noticed that iOS has this kind of Swift UI, right? That's really similar. It's on the declarative approach. It's just very, very similar. If you learn Jetpack Compose, you can really easily go on and play around with Swift UI. You just maybe have to learn the quirks of Swift, right, the language. But Swift UI as a framework, for example, for the UI, it's really similar to Jetpack Compose. And I think that what happened was that Jetpack Compose was announced or maybe released in the alpha version earlier than Swift UI. So I've heard about this, that many people were complaining that, oh my God, Android is just now finishing up with Compose, but iOS has this kind of declarative programming with Swift UI for so long now. And actually Jim's project at Google, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly, has actually mentioned that Jetpack Compose was started before that. But again, I have to be honest about this, and I have to say that iOS was faster with the release cycle, because their Swift UI is more mature than our Compose is. If I'm not mistaken, they have more iterations than we have, and they have launched the first stable version earlier than we did. Hopefully I'm not mistaken, but this is what I read at some point. So iOS has something that's in the same direction, and I think that this will fit really great as the future of mobile development.
And did I read that correctly? You are also writing a book about Compose. Is that possible?
Actually, I'm writing a book about, let's say, a modern development practices for Android. So the Jetpack libraries, clean architecture. Obviously, the Jetpack libraries are all revolved around Jetpack Compose, because everybody was asking in my course about integrations between Jetpack Compose and maybe a view model or coroutines and all that stuff. So I'm trying to have this kind of modern take on development on Android, and everything is revolved around Jetpack Compose, mostly because this subject hasn't been covered yet. I've seen books on Jetpack Compose, but let's say a hands-on practical guide that helps you build apps with Compose and the other tech stack that we have. Retrofit, coroutines, view model, sort of navigation. So all that kind of stuff is kind of bundled all together in the book, yeah.
And what's the timeline for this book?
Well, this book should be launched I think at the end of the first quarter next year. So around May, June, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around that date. But again, this depends. If I'm able to write it sooner than that, it might be sooner than that.
Okay, yeah, people can keep an eye on your Twitter account to get updates about this.
I'm always sharing updates about it, and hopefully it will be a good project, and hopefully Google won't deprecate everything by the end of the book, yeah.
And you also already mentioned Flutter and React Native, and earlier when we wrote on Twitter, you also mentioned Kotlin Multiplatform. So what are your experiences with these three frameworks, if you have any experience with that? Flutter, we already talked a little bit about this, React Native and Kotlin Multiplatform.
Yeah, so what I actually did in some while ago was I started learning about React Native simply because it felt like it could be part of our future as developers, right? I wanted to jump on the hype trend, if you will, and I thought that it was cool to have a unique code base, right? But it was kind of, if you come to think of it, it wasn't the best approach, and that's why you have apps like Airbnb that dropped out of React Native, right? Mostly because they ended up, instead of having one code base, right? They were seeing that they end up having three code bases, right? So one which was the common shared one for the actual React Native project, and then you have a huge 80% or something like that, 80% chunk for iOS and the rest again for Android. So instead of having maybe 80% of React Native, right? And the rest Android and iOS, they would have the opposite. So they would have a lot of native code and just so much less React Native code. So again, it's something that I don't really recommend against. You can learn it, right? I think that maybe Flutter might be a better idea, but if you would ask me honestly, I think that React Native and Flutter make sense for some specific cases. So when you're building simple apps, for example, for a startup that wants to launch a product really soon, right? Maybe having a shared platform for an easy application makes sense because they can develop it faster and ship it faster. We've spoken about the importance of shipping things really fast. But the thing is that as soon as you need to go into native code and native APIs and features like Bluetooth or whatever, you still have to go back to having separate code bases. So again, if your scope is having a simple app that doesn't go into very complex stuff, you can go with Flutter and React Native. But again, just try to avoid what Airbnb has done, because they have completely rewritten the project in React Native, right? And they went full native again. I remember I read about this at some point, and it kind of made me really think about things, right?
Right, they started in React Native and then rewrote it in native.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if they initially started with React Native. I know that they developed it with React Native, if I'm not mistaken. This is what I read some while ago, so hopefully I'm not really mixing things up. But they had the project with React Native, and then they migrated back to native because they would have just so much native code bases that it wouldn't make sense anymore. It was difficult to maintain.
Yeah, one problem I can imagine is that you start out with a simple app, but eventually you might need something like Bluetooth. And then what do you do then? I mean, it's possible on Flutter, right? But you need these plugins, and these plugins have to be maintained by people, if I understand this correctly.
Yeah. And also, I'm not sure if Flutter is as mature as React Native is. I've read about people complaining that they just didn't have access to good APIs and they couldn't get the job done. And exactly as you said, even if the stakeholder comes to you and tells you, we want to build a simple app that shows a couple of screens or maybe a few more screens, but there's nothing complex, you as a programmer, you can jump in and say, yeah, we're going to use Flutter. We're going to save you some time, and everybody is going to leave home really happy. But what happens if after 1 year, that same stakeholder or a different one comes and tells you that we need to add certain functionality to that existing app? And what are you going to do then? How are you going to explain that stakeholder that I can't really do that very efficiently in React Native or Flutter, and I need to go back to native? They're going to tell you, I'm not interested in that, right? So you have to be very careful. I mean, even it's very hard to predict this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I haven't tried out Flutter nor React Native nor Kotlin Multiplatform. I just did native Android basically. But what I imagine with my limited experience of zero, I imagine that Kotlin Multiplatform I can imagine that this makes more sense because you have this benefit of having shared code, but you still have this native code on each side, iOS and Android, and you can add all these platform-specific features if you need them, like Bluetooth. So you probably have to write more code with KMP than with Flutter, and the setup is probably more difficult. And you also need a Mac, right, to write iOS code. So it's a bit more difficult, but from my logic, this seems more interesting. And do you have any experience of KMP yet?
Yeah, I haven't worked with KMP. As I said, it's on my wish list and on my to-do list. I really want to play with it, and I can give you a really interesting example from my job that we have worked on really huge apps, as I said, and those apps had very complex logic of building different objects and having aggregation logic and having a lot of mapping, a lot of weird stuff, right, dictated by the stakeholder, and you can call them business logic, right? And all that business logic should have been on the server, but it was not our choice. Obviously, we couldn't really say that we want them on the server. We tried, but nobody heard us. So we had to implement that business logic on the client side, right? A lot of business logic. And that ended up on the Android code, right? On the Android code base and on the iOS code base. And now, obviously, the actual business logic was common, right? It should have been the same. And we kind of try to follow guidelines and we develop documentation for it. And we try to make sure that the Android code is going to be the exact with the iOS code. And I'm talking about huge classes not really huge classes, huge components, huge modules that take care of this business logic. And we try to do that. And in the end, we thought that we did a good job. But as time would tell, we saw that a few or even more bugs would arise because even though you are trying to implement the same thing in terms of business logic, because that logic is pretty complex, every developer will have a different take, a different approach of fixing some stuff. And you cannot control that to a very granular point, right? You can only control, maybe you have to create this algorithm, right? And you have to get this output, but you don't know exactly what that developer will do. And you can't have unified tests, right? So you're still stuck with your native platform because we are writing Android code and iOS code. So we've had so many bugs, very, very subtle bugs, very hidden bugs that were because our interpretation as Android developers was a bit different. So we did some things a bit different and some edge cases were yielding different results on Android and iOS, right? Because they had different developers. So I think that what KMP can actually help very much, apart from the sweet spot that you mentioned, right? That you have the native APIs, native access, right? It can also help you share that business logic, right? Because again, if it's a simple app, maybe it doesn't make sense. But for complex apps where that logic is spread across components and modules and whatever, things can get really inconsistent at some point, and you can detect them really difficultly. I mean, it's very difficult to detect them. So KMP can actually shine in some other areas, like having shared business logic and even having shared presentation logic. I've seen many developers working on this and trying to push this idea forward, that we can have a shared model layer, right? The business logic, repository logic, right? Getting the data, mapping it, adding business logic, whatever. And then having a common presentation layer, again with KMP and Kotlin, that can be shared across Android and iOS. And the only thing that would remain to be developed is the UI, right? And how to actually bind that UI to the state that common presenter, that common view model would share. Or obviously that would come from the common business logic from KMP. And this can obviously be done really nicely with having Compose, right, for Android as the UI side, and then having Swift, right, a Swift UI for the UI side on iOS. And everything apart from that is shared, right? And if you need something that's native and that would otherwise be difficult to be done with Flutter or React Native, then you can do that really easily because you would still have the native APIs at hand, right? So I think that in all of this craziness, I'm betting, my horse is KMP. I'm betting that the KMP might be the future on Android development or iOS development, so mobile development in general, because it hits that sweet spot of sharing enough code to be efficient and proficient, right? But still have that native code that allows you to not lose, obviously, the native APIs and all that stuff that you still need at the end, because that's the main issue that React Native and Flutter have had.
Aren't there even plans to bring Jetpack Compose to iOS, or am I misinformed?
Yeah, I've read about this, but I don't know anything official. I know that we have support for desktop. I know that I've heard at some point that we might have support for web, even though again, I'm not sure about it. So right now, I think that these are speculations. I haven't heard about anything official. It would be cool, but I don't know how much the iOS developers actually want that.
Yeah, it's true. There will probably never be a time where we write native code on both platforms at the same time, because iOS and Android, they are competitors.
I mean, Florian, think it of it this way: would you write Swift UI for your UI layer and have KMP shared for the rest of the layers?
Why not? You mean on Android, or what?
Yeah.
I don't.
So ditch Compose and anything else.
Yeah, if how is it called? How is the UI?
Swift UI.
Swift UI. If that's nice and easy to use, then why not?
Yeah, but the question is if the developers at iOS think the same, because this is something that we don't know. So yeah, I mean, I think that the next logical step is having the UI written natively with Compose and Swift UI. I think that this is the future, and having KMP hold the rest of the common logic, because you'd have the same code base. You have developers that are proficient with Kotlin and that can design those APIs correctly, right? But again, I don't know how much the iOS developers are willingly to learn Kotlin, right?
But in your example, we also don't have Jetpack view model anymore. Is that right? In your example, this is also
yes, that's gone. That's gone.
So you have to write your own view model.
Yes, that's gone. So probably the best idea is to have your own kind of view model that is restricted to the Android system, right? So you don't want to have in the KMP layer, right? In the KMP module, if you will, you would have the presentation logic, so the view model, and the business logic, so and the model layer. But all of those shouldn't have dependencies to Android, as in the same way they shouldn't have dependencies to iOS. So obviously we would need something. I think that I've seen a sample that kind of tries to share everything together, but things are pretty in alpha, if you like.
And what data holder would you then use between the view model and the UI? Would this be Kotlin Flow?
I've heard, I mean, what I've seen that is pushed right now in those samples is that Kotlin Flow is used. Yeah, because again, Kotlin is part of Kotlin Multiplatform, is independent of Android and iOS. So you can also use the Kotlin APIs. You won't use, obviously, things that are like live data or, yeah, I don't know. I think that iOS doesn't have RX Java. They have RX Swift or something, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely seems interesting.
Yeah.
You would have to give up stuff like Room, but there are already third-party libraries that do the same, and that can be shared between iOS and Android.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think Roam does this. I mean, there are solutions to this. And just imagine that you're going to work on projects where you have to build a UI, right? And that's it, right? I mean, obviously, you can be part of the team that develops the presentation and the model layer, and you can have part of other type of action. But you can have developers that only build a UI, and that's it.
Yeah, this seems like a future that makes sense. And it's basically already possible, right? It's not easy yet because it's not so streamlined, but you can already do this, right?
Again, I've seen some samples, but I haven't tested them for myself.
Maybe I should try this out soon. I'm a bit afraid of the setup process because I think it's not as easy yet.
It's still very rough. I mean, I've seen people complaining on Twitter that they're spending days and days having trouble with having the bill set up and everything. It's still very early. We don't know if this is going to be the future, obviously. But it seems to be a very plausible way.
Yeah, because I have my little app on the Play Store already, and if I could also release this to iOS, to the App Store, then would be really nice, would be more users. So it definitely seems interesting.
Well, you'd have to rewrite it with Kotlin Multiplatform, but
Right.
yeah, but it's still just as a single developer, it's obviously it's something that seems more appealing because it's a bit less effort, and hopefully things will mature and we will see this kind of approach because it sounds cool, but time will tell.
Yeah, and I guess for something like the view model, there will be people who bring out new libraries that can be shared between
Yeah.
iOS and Android that maybe make this job a bit easier. Although writing a view model by yourself doesn't seem to be very difficult.
Yeah, if you come to think of it in terms of very simple lifecycle tasks, yeah, it's probably not that difficult, but there are probably edge cases that you're not really thinking right now about, and that you might hit them. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And for something like, no, retrofit is not Android specific, so you could use retrofit in a KMP project, right?
I guess again, I don't want to say I don't want to go into things that I don't really know, but I've seen some samples that were just like being shared on Twitter, and yeah, maybe we can link one of them in the description if we can find them.
Yeah, if we find one, I will link them. I will link it below. And those are actually all the notes I've written down. Is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I think that in terms of we were right at the kind of tips for starting out, right? I think that I mean no, we kind of passed that. Yeah, wait, but there's still one thing that I would like to add. If we can come back there for 1 second, I think that the idea of getting involved in communities as soon as possible, being part of maybe 100 days of code, trying to build some small open source projects. These kind of things really help because when you start and you're part of this, you kind of get exposed to so many other people. You can see how they are thinking. You can find out insightful advices that really make sense and that help you. And what I really value, as I said, I've held quite a few interviews, and when there were candidates that didn't have experience, right? What I really valued was that were those actual candidates that had put the effort into creating a project on themselves, maybe trying to contribute to a project on open source, right? To a GitHub repo. Maybe they tried to build something on their own. They had some sort of a blog or something. So I think that for all of those that are starting out, getting involved as soon as possible will be very, very useful on the long term.
Yeah, and putting out content. But we already mentioned that earlier, that this is important. Anything else?
Well, now apart from those advices, no. I think that there would be that point of I wanted to briefly discuss with you regarding
briefing exercise.
Yes, the briefing exercises. So I know that in the previous podcast with Wiseas, I think 2 podcasts ago or something, you guys talked about...
Yeah, that's Ryan K, basically. That's the name in the title of the podcast.
Yeah, I'm not going
Only that people can find it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's better. Yeah. So you guys talked about meditation, right? And it was really interesting to hear you guys about that. And I thought that I could add my 2 cents in this. I think that meditation is really beneficial. I don't have that much experience with it, so I'm not gonna tell any lies about it. But what I do and what helps me very much with stress and all kind of events that happen throughout the day. And if you don't have that kind of time frame, if you need more time for meditations, and if you don't have that kind of time frame, you can always set aside 3 or 4 or 5 minutes for doing some breathing exercises. And I think that maybe this kind of sounds really weird. How could some breathing exercises actually help me? But believe me, they actually decrease your blood pressure, but more precisely, they decrease your heart rhythm, right? So your BPM, right, your beats per minute, and that thing relaxes you and helps you to stay more focused. And probably you have heard about this, but there's an actual breathing exercise that I wanted to share with you really briefly, that was actually used by the commando troops, right? When before they were going into a battle, I've read about this, and hopefully it's accurate. They were doing this kind of breathing exercises in order to focus, to be calm, and to be prepared, right, for what was ahead of them, right? A battle or an incident, whatever. So I tried to borrow that. I tried to I don't know, steal that kind of idea. And I always try, when I feel that there's a lot of pressure, when I feel that there's a lot of things that are basically overwhelming me, right? I try to perform a breathing exercise. And I can share really quickly the idea behind box breathing, which is a very simple breathing exercise. And if you ever feel stressed at your work and you just want to take 2 or 3 minutes to sit aside and try to relax yourself, you can perform this breathing exercise, right? And you will see how relaxed you will be afterwards, and you will be like in a very chill situation, right? You can actually take on problems much easier and much more efficiently. So what this breathing exercise is, basically a 4 phases exercise, right? In which you breathe in, you hold your breath, and then you exhale, and then you hold your breath again. And the idea is that for every step, for every phase, you hold your breath you do that step for 4 seconds. And it's called a box breathing exercise because people have thought of a way to remind those guys that want to perform the breathing exercise with the concept of a square, of a box, right? And the box has 4 sides. And the idea is like that. On the first side, so let's say that you have a horizontal side, right, which is the first side, the upper horizontal side of the box, you would start taking in air, right? And you start inhaling for 4 seconds. And then after 4 seconds, you would proceed to the second phase. So let's say the right vertical side of the box. So for 4 seconds now, you just keep your breath for 4 seconds. And then on the lower side of the box, for another 4 seconds, you start exhaling, right? You start exhaling through your mouth and you try to take out all of that air from your lungs, right? In 4 seconds. And then on the last phase, on the last side of the box, which would be the vertical left one, you hold your breath again for 4 seconds. And then you repeat this process. So you start again, inhaling 4 seconds, and then keeping your breath 4 seconds, and then exhaling 4 seconds, and then keeping your breath again for 4 seconds. And you keep on doing that for a few minutes. I would say that sometimes I feel the effects much better when it's like 5 minutes, right? If you keep doing that for a few minutes, you will feel yourself relaxed. And I've actually tested this, and I took my actual heartbeats, right? My BPM, my beats per minute. And after 5 minutes of doing this exercise, I've seen a decrease of 10, 15 beats per minute. And this really helps you become more calm. And it's a great alternative if you don't have the time to go into a meditation state and you have only a couple of minutes available to just decompress and just relax a bit and don't strangle your manager or something.
And in what kind of situations do you use that? Just in the middle of the day?
I don't have really a schedule, right? But whenever I feel that I'm overwhelmed by tasks, or I feel maybe angry at something, and I feel a lot of pressure. Maybe we have a release and there's something new that has broken, and I feel that I feel that kind of anxiety, that stress, right? So there are moments in the day where you feel overwhelmed, right? And in order to decompress, you can just have this breathing exercises, which takes just a few minutes, and you will feel better. Most of the people actually feel better.
Yeah, we'll definitely try that out. So it's just 4 seconds in, 4 seconds holding, and then 4 seconds out.
And 4 seconds holding again.
Yeah.
And then repeat.
And I don't know if you already said this, but for how long at a time do you do this? Do you do this many minutes at a time or only a few seconds?
I actually, you have to do this for a few minutes. So you have to repeat this. This kind of cycle obviously should take you 16 seconds, right? So that's roughly, let's say 4 cycles, right? 4 cycles per minute. So it would be great if you'd at least have 20 cycles, right? In which you kind of do this exercise. So 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay, nice. So people should try this out when they feel anxiety or feel stressed. And then my last question is, where can people find out more about you? Of course, I will put a link to your Udemy courses into the description and to your Twitter account. And are there any other accounts or any other sites or any other ways people can reach you that you want to mention?
I think that the most representative one is Twitter, because that's where I'm most active, and that's the place where you can very easily interact with me. We also have a very small Discord community where we talk.
Yeah, I'm in there. I'm in there actually.
Yeah. So apart from the big central Android dev Discord group, I just created this group because this smaller group, right? Because there were a lot of people on Twitter asking me help about different stuff, and I obviously felt overwhelmed at some point, and I thought that maybe we can have a small community and have other people contributing, and it has gained a bit of traction, and you can also find me there and reach me at any hour. So yeah, if I would say probably that Twitter is the best entry point. Yeah.
Okay. Again, I will put all this in the show notes. On YouTube, this is the video description. And later when I upload the audio version of this podcast, that's the show notes, or however this is called there. And there people can find you. And I recommend that they follow you on Twitter because you put out really informational tweets and where you actually teach stuff, right? Where you actually write these little threads where you explain topics. So I really like that. And I recommend people to follow that account. And yeah, then I just want to thank you for coming on the show, and I wish you a nice rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Florian. It has been these 3 hours have been really, really great, and I'm glad that we were able to share so much useful information. And I also like to thank you for having me here and for actually completing and talking with me here. It was a great opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great for me too. All right, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.